communism Okay. Hello, everyone. It is time to speak about the allegations. No, of course not. There are no allegations. At least, not for me. There are definitely some for Benjamin Netanyahu, but we'll get into that later. Okay. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Shakespeare Show. It's so nice to see everybody, especially everybody in YouTube chat. It's so nice to see you. It's so nice to see that people are showing up for the show for today. Like I said, in solidarity with all of the other events that are happening across the country and across the world, right? I'm doing a teach-in, right, to go over, as a historian, right, like, although I don't like to always be saying that, I sometimes feel a little bit bad always being like, well, blah, 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 but one thing I just want to make clear is this is to be in solidarity with the people of Palestine who are currently, undergoing and they're being subjected to genocidal violence, the likes of which we cannot even begin to fathom. So this teaching to talk a little bit about the history of Palestine is something that I hope that, hello Pedro, welcome in, that I hope, will allow us to talk a little bit more about the subject in a more, in a manner that I think will be useful. Okay. So first, let me just turn off the music. I like the intro music, I don't know. Like, I know some people are kind of like, oh, and I finally was able to get some tea. I really like to drink tea in the afternoon. I don't know. It's just one of those habits, right? Because a lot of when I was growing up, a lot of the Hasidim that I knew, they were from Russia, right, or from the former Soviet Union. And so, they would drink a lot of tea, like in the middle of the day. But it's funny because because I'm Mexican, right? And, at night people drink coffee and we have pan dulce. So it's like, I got used to drinking coffee late and tea in the middle of the day. But it is what it is. But we move on. Good. I'm glad. So for today, we're going to go over the history of Palestine, but I want to approach it from a slightly different angle, right? Something that was brought up before. Yeah, exactly. I like the little, in fact, a friend of mine bought me a little kettle so that I can have it right here, so I don't have to like go to my little kitchen and bring all the stuff over, because it's a mess. It can lead to, but yeah. So what I want to focus on right now is, although this is not the English title, right? Obviously, this is different. This is a book that, like I've mentioned to you all that, when I research something, I am, I have a lot of notes on every page. There's a lot, right? Like, I even draw, like, I mean, you can't really see here, but there's graphs in here. There's, all of these different things, right? Because, this is very important, right? This book here, which is, of course, the 100 Years' War on Palestine, but in Spanish it's called Palestina, 100 años de colonialismo y resistencia. So, yes, yeah, I was so happy when I got it, because I'm like, oh, I love tea. Like, even this, like in my infusion bottle, it's another type of tea. It's a Persian type of tea that tastes really, really good chilled. Just really I just put the leaves and it still will steep really nicely, and it's really, really good. So one way that I wanted to approach this is by trying to dispel, right, this idea of the settlement of Palestine, right, the colonization of Palestine, right, by supposed socialists, right? There are a lot of people say, oh, well, you know, there are leftist Israelis, right? There are labor Zionists, there are socialist Zionists. No, you know, or, you know, the main thing to keep in mind here is that just because, you know, certain forms of social organization, right, were sort of brought forth, if they were done through using the rules of apartheid, right, that means that by definition, it is not a leftist thing. Right, exactly. Leftism requires solidarity, right? Zionism inherently, and Zionism, ethno-nationalism. Oh my goodness, look at that. 10 stream streak. Awesome. Yeah, and also for the YouTube side, I just found out earlier that now I know why I could not do the raid out on the YouTube side. You can only do redirects if you have 1,000 subs. So since I don't have that, you know, I still, like, my channel on YouTube is still not monetizable. You know, I'm trying to get it there slowly but surely, but you know, it's you know, hence why I started multicasting. You know, when I found that out, I was a little bit like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. Okay, so without further ado, right, we're gonna go right into it. Okay.
Has never worked except in this place. Welcome to Israel! Israel is one of the most innovative countries in the world, and it's not a communist nation. But inside this tiny country, there are thousands.
I mean, did anyone ever think that Israel was a communist nation? I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think ever. Like, I think when people say, oh, you know, Stalin was willing to support it because, you know, he thought maybe they would be an ally for the Soviet Union. I mean, in the sense of, like, any state could possibly be an ally of the Soviet Union, but, like, I have never looked at Israel and been like, oh yeah, that's what communism is. Like, never.
Of people living a communist lifestyle. Let me show you how it works. This is what they call.
Yeah, I feel like there are a lot of people, you know, like in South Africa. I don't know if you've ever heard of the town of Orania, or Orania, as you would say it in Afrikaans, right? Please like the stream. Yes, and if you know how to do the, like, little codes to how to, like, set up the little bot stuff, I would appreciate that. I have no idea what to do with, like, YouTube. I've never really been good at that. I was gonna put, like, this message and pin it, but just give me one quick second while I transition over, just so that way I can drop it in. So if you'd like to help me with my research in some way, you can always contribute, right, by, you know, trying to help me with, you know, like the books up here, right, particularly this book by Erin Grefsevin, because, again, I'm almost done reading her other book that's talking about, you know, Jews in Latin America. So, you know, if you would like to help, and this one focuses a little more on Brazil, so that's the reason why I, you know, want to do that, because I'm working on a book project, you know, so there's a lot of reading I got to do, and, you know, anything people can do to help is always appreciated. So back to the video.
A kibbutz.
Adam Newman, the founder and former CEO of the infamous once $47 billion startup WeWork, grew up in Nir Am, a kibbutz.
Okay, sorry, but, like, okay, the fact that it's like, yeah, this multi-billionaire lived in a kibbutz, so therefore, like, this is something that even, like, in the United States they try to do, right? When they're like, oh, you know, he lived in a small town, and, you know, he would, you know, roll up his sleeves and blah blah blah, and then you turn, you know, but, you know, of course he only got a loan of, you know, infinity $1 billion, right? You know.
just a few kilometers away from Gaza.
That connects. As I said earlier, I grew up in the kibbutz, and that gave me a lot of who I am. And bringing people together and building community has always been what we were about and what I was about.
This article in Jewish Currents makes a brilliant comparison between the story of the kibbutz and...
I mean, they're all capitalist kibbutz. I don't know why, like, people take the idea of, like, communal living as such as being, like, socialism. Like, no. Like, that's just having lots of roommates. You know what I mean? And lots of people to spread the chores around. That's really what that is. I mean, it's just a compound, right? It's not communism, right? It's a compound, not communism. So I don't know. Like, as someone again who has researched, right, very much, like pretty much, like I said, I mentioned yesterday, I've read Norman Finkelstein's doctoral dissertation, right? Almost all of the primary literature that he read that was about Zionism, I've read it too, for the most part. Like, maybe with the exception of, like, oh, I didn't, because I had a book that was just like the main speeches. It wasn't every speech, whatever. But besides that, like, every time that they try to show the kibbutz as this kind of like success story of like social organization, I'm like, they have these in Denmark. I mean, we have these in Mexico. They're called the ejidos, right? I already showed a map the other day that showed that most of the country either belongs to indigenous peoples, right, is reserved for indigenous peoples, or is in ejido, which is, again, community-owned land, right? As opposed to the United States, where it's either federally owned or privately owned. There's no real in-between.
WeWork. The author recounts how from the start, Newman emphasized how important kibbutz values were to the core of his company, calling it Kibbutz 2.0.
As for the we generation, it's not limited by age or gender. Anybody that wants to be part of something greater than themselves, that understands that bringing meaning and intention into work and bringing those two things together is a member of the we generation, and the money tends to follow.
What this meant was clear when WeWork, we crashed, and the wannabe cooperative altruist walked away, paying himself almost $2 billion.
I was about to say, like, didn't they go bankrupt or something? Yeah, they did. So, like, I don't even get it then. Like, what was, oh yeah, so all I know how to do is just, like, fail at being a billionaire, right? And of course he paid himself. I mean, I never understood why people don't get the, like, again, other people, right? That, like, CEO or whatever isn't a real job, right? Like when they say, oh, they're out there getting up every day. No, they're not. No, they're not. Like, it's already been shown that, like, most CEOs don't even know where their office building is, So, I don't know.
Thousands of employees became jobless. Newman, who had served for 5 years as an IDF Navy captain.
Okay, so I want to clarify this, right? Hello, Soul Life. Welcome in. Welcome in. Welcome in. I appreciate you being here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, when people have to serve in the IDF, right? And of course, it's binary, right? As much as people like to say, oh, Israel is the only place where blah, blah, it's not. It's not. It's demonstrably not. One, gay marriage is not legal, right? Equal marriage is not legal in Israel. They will recognize it if it happens somewhere else. But also, even inter-ethnic marriage is not allowed in the state of Israel. So, civil marriage isn't a thing in Israel either. So, like, if you just are not religious and you want to get married, you have to go to another country, get married, and then come back. Yeah, they're leeches, right? Exactly. They're like leeches in that they like, things that taste very metallic, right? But like this is something but like this is something, right, where yes, the power of the wrench and the hammer, of course, but the main thing being that if we just go back just one quick second.
The wannabe cooperative altruist walked away, paying himself almost $2 billion, while thousands of employees became jobless.
Like, see, like right there, like that's all you have to hear, right? Like, oh, here's this person that apparently had the secret, right? That was supposed to be, yes. So like, if you know how to do the like stuff for the bot, I have no idea how to do it. I mean, I barely know how to do it on my end over here. In fact, Phoenix Dragon's been doing a lot of that. Oh, just just like if you like the the typical, like, if you would like to help me, like one of them is for my throne, which is the pin comment. Another one does my link tree. Another one, just to like check out my Twitch, etc. Stuff like that. Yeah, setting up commands, right. And we can discuss this later if necessary. That's totally fine. Also, like to get a link for the Discord too, because that would be nice. Also, I do want to have a movie night at some point, but I want to make sure that there are going to be like, I don't know, like at least like 3 people there, besides me. Because once I tried to have a movie night very early on, and I should have known, but like, I enjoyed the movie, but there was only one other person, and then they left like 15 minutes in. So, if you add it via the website, I can set up commands. Okay.
Newman, who had served for 5 years as an IDF Navy captain, portrayed WeWork as a forerunner of the so-called...
Here we go. Okay, so when people serve in the IDF, right? Again, it's binary. So men, cis, they presume cisness, right? Men serve 3 years. Women serve 2 years, right? That's how it works. It's just about that time period. That means that he signed a contract to stay on the IDF, right? Because it really is more 1 year, 2 years, right? With women only doing 1, men doing 2. So the fact that he did 5 means that at least 3 of those years were his choice, right? He specifically, right, wanted to be in the Israeli Navy, right? Now, don't let... Oh my God. That means that so the Israeli Navy, what it's been used for mostly is, I kid you not, and I really, this is true, stopping Palestinian fishermen from Gaza from leaving the closest part to the coast, right, to reach their technically legal, according to international law, Palestinian waters, right, where there is a deep channel where there is much more fish, and instead has led to the overfishing of the area, and also pollution, etc., within the just the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, just off of the Gaza coast, right? And so that means that he worked doing that, because that's pretty much all they do. Like they don't really do any patrols in the Red Sea, because they have Egypt on one side and Jordan on the other, 2 countries with peace treaties. They don't need to be there. And they don't sail around in the Dead Sea. So it's only on the Mediterranean. And it's typically to harass, to arrest, to do much, much worse to Palestinian fishermen, right, bosuns, etc.
sharing economy. He said the reason the actual kibbutzim are, quote, a failed social experiment is that they are socialist.
In this community here,
What?
everyone shares everything, from money to cars and even laundry. My name is India, and you are about to get a look at one of Israel's very own utopian communities, otherwise known as a kibbutz. A kibbutz.
Well, okay, utopian community. The villages, I've been told in Florida that it's a utopian community, but it's not, right? I'm sorry, but the reign of the golf cart, and the pools of 70-plus-year-old cis white man's sweat is not exactly utopian to me, but but like this whole thing about holding things in common, I mean, this already pre-existed. I mean, this isn't socialist as such, right? Like Marx talks about this, Engels talks about this, right? In the idea of primitive socialism, right? They get promoted for unaliving Palestinians via the U.S. would they go back to work after a paid vacation. Yeah. And not only that, but like people, like what people will do is once they're done with the IDF, this is like I kid you not, like when I was reading this, because I was reading a lot about how religious Jewish people, right, the Charedim, right, have had an exemption to never serve in the IDF, right, but now they want to change that, right, because now they want to have them also, go, against the Palestinians, right. And there was this interesting rabbi, I think it was Rabbi Eliyahu Sterner or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but he was writing about how, the IDF is so, it would be wrong for religious, scholars to go there, because after people are done with the IDF service, they go to places like India or Thailand, right, on essentially on paid vacation, right, that like that thing that like upper middle class like white people do, right, where they do like a gap year. That's what people do after serving in the IDF, and then they go to college. Okay, no worries, all life. Drive safe.
Kibbutz is a type of collective community that only exists in Israel.
It turns out, as the article explains, the vast majority of the actual kibbutzim had been already evolving into Kibbutz 2.0 for a long time, undergoing wholesale privatization, becoming startup hubs, and sites for high-tech arms manufacturing.
Oh, well, would you look at that? Look at how utopian that is. State-of-the-art arms manufacturing. Wow. Who would have thought? Again, any person that tries to bring, and they do try to bring this up even now, right? Because, again, like when they bring up kibbutz Be'eri, etc., they try to say, they were just living there in this agrarian lifestyle. No, they weren't. Like, even if they did have a kibbutz that had, like farming, right? It would be on an industrial. It would be on an industrial or reaching that scale, right? Hiring, right, foreign labor, typically Palestinians, but increasingly people from the subcontinent, the Philippines, etc. Right? So they're not farmers. Like these aren't like their little pumpkin patches that they're out there doing, right? A collective community arms manufacturer, exactly. But like they still try to sell this as like, it's just little grandmother's knitting, and they're over there. Did you hear about Did you hear what Yossi did? It's not like that.
Administered by business managers for profit, exhibiting high levels of inequality. However, its mythology.
Like, look, how can there be a supposed socialist thing, right? A communal thing, and yet it has high inequality. I mean, like all that means is that there's high inequality, and it means that when you do have to do the dishes, you have to do everybody's dishes, not just your own, right?
Survived, to this day, giving the Israeli occupation the guise of progressivism. Similar to WeWork, beneath the facade of utopian idealism lies a poorly hidden history of ruthless domination. In Kibbutz Nir Am, where Newman grew up, an Arab man was brutally tortured and executed during the Nakba in 1948. The planned ethnic cleansing, which didn't come out of nowhere, but was the logical...
Like this is the thing. People, when they try to do Nakba denial, right, they want to say that, we weren't the people that started it, right? The IDF or what became the IDF, the Rechi, Hagana, etc. But this is actually contradicted by testimony and even by the leaders of the state of Israel that already said they already were vacating Arab villages before they even declared independence. Right? So yes, they're literally lying when they say that like, the Arab states invaded us, right? And we were perfectly fine. Like the World Zionist Organization and the Jewish Agency for Palestine, as it was called then, actually did not accept the borders that were given in 47, right? They wanted the whole thing, right? And so one of the problems is that when they say, the Palestinians had a chance in 1947, 1948, 19 whatever, blah blah blah. No, they didn't. Nobody had any right to partition Palestine and to give the vast majority of the land to somebody else. Nobody has that right. And so right there, just from that very beginning point, that fundamental, every argument after that is just irrelevant in many ways, right? But since it did happen, then we must look at the facts. And one of those is that the Haganah, we know, was already in northern Israel, not even in central Israel, in northern Israel, where you have still a majority Palestinian towns like Nazareth, right? Like Akko or Accra, right? Etc., right? That they were already trying to depopulate those villages there. And I mentioned yesterday about that one documentary about Tantua. I do want to go over it, but it's just when those ex-Haganah soldiers start like laughing about what they did, years later, it's just, I don't know. To me, it's very, very haunting. Personally, it's a little bit too much, but I did ask our wonderful mod Zira if she could make like a version that has that all cut out, but it's a little hard because I do have to have some of their context in, right? So here we have armed settlers in the kibbutz, right? So the people like Benny Morris, like even Destiny, right? Or Mr. Borelli or Mr. Wikipedia, whatever, whatever you want to call him, right? I prefer to call him Mr. Wikipedia, okay? It sounds like a spa treatment, but the main thing, right, is that this belief that, only if they were officially enlisted in these paramilitary organizations, those were the people that were actually fighting. No, that's not true. We know this because we know that there are people here in the United States, for example, that are armed up and like, for example, like the 3%ers, like the Proud Boys, like the Oath Keepers, right? Like they disprove this idea that only formal, that only like, if I'm wearing fatigues, right, and I have my name on and I have dog tags, that's what makes me a combatant, right? No. Like the people that were in the different kibbutzim along the border with Gaza, right, were the people that were also helping in the policing and surveillance of Gaza. So this whole thing of seeing them as like, completely innocent bystanders that, don't, never, only wanted the best for the Palestinians. Yeah, there were some people that work with the Palestinians. That's true. But it does not mean that the vast majority of the people there on stolen land already, right, being subsidized by the government. Because, so here's where I want to take a quick step back, right? So since the state of Israel took the Nuremberg, the Nazi race laws, and just kind of appropriated them for their own definition of who is a Jew, right? Like, right, that is, that those are the racial definitions that they use, right? That means that if you qualify under those particular circumstances, right, then you get to move to the state of Israel, right? You make Aliyah, right, where they put you up, right, so that way you can learn Hebrew in an ulpan. You don't have to pay taxes for years, right? You get subsidized housing. You get subsidized, you know what I mean? Like, it is by definition a colonial project because of the methods, right, of colonization that are being done, right? This is literally incentives for colonizing, right? It's not people immigrating so as to immigrate, right? It's people going because it, by definition, dispossesses someone else, right? Because most people choose to, most of the new housing stock that's built is not built in mainland Israel. It's built in the settlements. And so that means that more and more Palestinian land that shouldn't have been touched in the first place by the state of Israel is. So, again, to keep in mind. So the settlers contribute to that as well.
Consequence of settler
Yes, exactly. Funded by the U.S.
colonialism in the previous decades. The socialist or labor Zionist movement, which we introduced in the last part, laid the ideological and structural foundations of the state of Israel. And one of those foundations was the kibbutz, becoming the only commune in history to have played a central role in the birth of a state, with many established in key locations, functioning as paramilitary strongholds for colonial expansion.
See, right there. I have not pre-watched this video. so the fact that Best D Marks ended up just confirming or concurring with what I said again, and I know it's because that he did, like, I've seen the bibliography. I know that he's read most of the books that, including like this one, right? I have some other ones. I meant to put some other ones on Throne because I really need one of Ilan Pape's book, the Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, but because I don't have a physical copy. But regardless. So again, these kibbutzim, the reason why they were allowed to exist, the reason why they're subsidized by the government, the reason why they've become essentially capitalist outposts, is because they started off as capitalist imperialist outposts, right? That's what they were meant to do, right? And the fact that any violence was enacted anywhere near them is also something that one can see happen in the American frontier, right? Where people place themselves strategically so that then when peoples whose land they are stealing, right, do come to try to come to some kind of justice, right, in some way, they can then blame the oppressed people as being, oh, it was them. They're the ones that started it, right? And that's exactly what you see with October 7th. It was their fault. They started it, but they didn't, because the kibbutzim already within their existence had this inside them, right? So,
shaping the boundaries of contemporary Israel, becoming the model and pillar of the displacement of Palestinians from their land and their systematic exclusion from the economy. What is the history of the kibbutz? What is socialist about it, as many on the left like to claim? And what mental acrobatics did the kibbutz leaders use in attempting to combine Zionism with communism? And
like, when I hear that, trying to connect Zionism and communism, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, there is no communism, right? Like, there might have once been like the idea of a commune, right, where stuff was held in common, but again, it was because the state of Israel, right, essentially the Mapai party, which is the labor Zionist party, right, or the workers party of the land of Israel, that's actually what Mapai, like the acronym is, right, is that they only undertook, right, these measures of social democracy, which is what they were. They're not socialists. They're radlibs at best. And even then, I hesitate to even say that. But they only implemented social democratic things, right, for Jewish Israelis. Only for them. Only they got the benefits of the 8-hour working day, be able to be paid overtime, the universal health care, the education, everything, right? And it was systematically not given to people that were Palestinian, right? I can't help but think of the U.S. stealing land from the natives and saying, and when people try to say, but Israel is the Jews, right? And see, that's the thing, like, there was already a movement in Europe called the Bundists, and they came up with a song that is a song that's like an anti-Zionist song, right? Proving that anti-Zionism, didn't just appear after October 7th, as some Zionist ideologues say online, but rather before the state of Israel was even founded, was even, they have a song that says, "Oh, you foolish little Zionist, you want to take us to Jerusalem so we can die as a nation. We'd rather stay in the diaspora and fight for our liberation," right? And that is the essence of like where I stand, right? Like wherever I am, right? That is the place that needs to be liberated. Not at the expense of other people. Like even here in California, in Los Angeles, the indigenous people have to have their say. Right? It cannot just be, okay, well, we're just gonna give everybody lots of money now. No. That is not what we want. That's not what any leftist should want. Land back is not just a slogan, regardless of whatever Norman Finkelstein says. Right? Yeah, and speaking about the reservations, I mean, remember that the idea of reservations were things that, were used in, South Africa, right? Southern Africa in general, right? They are called just reserves, but still, right? And in fact, there used to always be this kind of, like, if you read the standard history, like that's to say, like by, like kind of like in a high school or a introductory college textbook, right? Not like by an academic historian, right? That like specializes on that, right? They actually make it seem, and I've actually heard this in a documentary, saying that the British government was like and I'm this is almost a direct quote, because they even said the word savior of the native people in Africa to protect them from the whites. And I'm just like, what on earth are you talking about? Like, it's like, yeah, they gave them reserves and forced them to live there, right? That's not saving them. Like, I don't know what that's supposed to mean. And another thing too is like, the United States, its reservation system, right, is also made so that the reservations are far away from where people are. Like even the largest reservation in the United States that even has, the largest population, right, the Navajo reservation, is, does not encompass the totality of their lands, right, ancestral lands, and they don't. And also, I was reading about this in an article just the other day. They only have one chain of grocery stores, right? Like there are a couple of grocery stores throughout the reservation, right? But it's one company. So if that company goes under, that's it. So if capitalism does the capitalism, they're not going to have grocery stores, So that's one thing that we have to remember, right? The reservation system was meant to keep the indigenous peoples everywhere that we're talking about this, far away from where most people live, right? That's why, there were people that would almost tell me kind of like horror stories, right? Like, oh, I went here and there were, but it was always, but then, when they went to reservations, but it's one, they're being protective of their culture, right? Because they don't want it to be stolen. They don't want it to be appropriated after centuries of it happening. And also another thing is they don't want to be gawked at, right? They're not some anthropological specimen, right? That is one of the big things. Like if you're going to go visit, right? If you want to travel and you go to, one of the reservations, right? Most people will be, but the whole point is they're human beings. Right, at the end of the day, they're human beings. And that is something that a lot of people just seem to like, once they see reservation, they act like, it's a special, I don't know, hotel zone.
Justify bloody colonial conquest beneath the guise of a bastardized idea of the socialist vision.
which, remember, you know who else claimed that they were representing like a true form of socialism, or however you ever want to say it, but they actually used it for nationalistic purposes? The National Socialists, right? I am not going to say that there is a direct comparison to be made, right? I personally don't think that that's necessary. But in terms of like, these are the actual, this is the way how socialism should be implemented, right? Or, well, it's socialism but for one group of people, right? Like, in terms of ideologically speaking, right, they begin to sound similar. It does not mean, however, that they are the same, but again, it just shows that socialism and the language of the left can be co-opted by the right so easily, and it always has been, particularly when it comes to, nationalistic and fascistic, groups. So here, let me this is from Franz Fanon from The Wretched of the Earth. Quote, "For a colonized people, the most essential value, because the most concrete, is first and foremost the land which will give them bread and above all dignity." End quote. Gross American tourists, they get excited with fireworks and liquor and tobacco, but I've never heard anyone excited about the people. I mean, right. I mean, like, I will never forget, like, one, I get told, I shouldn't say I get told, like, as if it's a common occurrence, right? Like, I went to to this reservation and, to go gamble, right? Which is the most common, right? Because here in California, typically that's what people do, right? They go down to Ramona, California, right there's a reservation, right? Anyway, they have that, but then also, what you get is this, like, I want to, like, almost like saying, like, see, like, almost like when they're speaking about, like, kind of like David Attenborough, right? When he's like, look at the caterpillar in its natural habitat, right? And it's like, no, that's the problem. Colonial violence is still happening when you do not see people as human, and when everything you do is like, you want them to be authentic and you want them to be blah blah blah. Like, you cannot. That is a colonial relationship, right? It's like it's in fact, I think it's a command here on Twitch, but I want to say it's liberation. Yeah, we cannot tell an oppressed people how to go about their liberation, nor should we be telling, right, a colonized group of people, right, that they should behave or interact with XYZ in a certain way, right, because of expectations. So, yeah, so, like, that's one of those things where, like, that's the reason why I've always made the distinction, and perhaps this is only a personal distinction, right, between the idea of a traveler and a tourist, right? A traveler being someone that actually engages in the culture, right? Learns the language, right? Tries to learn the culture, tries to be part of, right? Like, understanding that they are not, but does not try to center themselves, does not try to, make it all about how they are relating to this person, right? Right? It's not about how they treat you. It's about how you treat, you know what I mean? Like, being conscious of that. And that, as soon as people can do that, right, and really, really decenter, themselves, and really think about the coloniality in that way, how, like, the centering of the tourist, right, like, because it's an experiential thing, is one of those aspects that kind of is not really questioned, right? Like, oh, well, you paid for this, so you should get, like when people go to Mexico, right? What do they want? Oh, they want to see people with maracas. They want to see, people, with, mariachi. You know what I mean? And it's like, mariachi is it's a regional thing, right? It's not all over the country, right? Tortas ahogadas, for example, particular type of food, they don't sell them all over the place because they're also a regional food. right? But it just goes to show that, like, when people travel to many countries, they don't see it as the almost infinite set of multiplicities that is available there, and try to appreciate that, right? It's always, I want my experience to be this, right? Which is in some ways kind of like people who wrongly, right, when they're constructing an argument, begin with a conclusion and then try to work, find stuff that agrees with them to prove their conclusion correct, right? Yeah, it's absolutely dehumanizing, right? Exactly. And it's something that Bezras Hashem will stop, but I can't say that I'm particularly expecting it to, but soon anyway.
In 1901, at the Fifth Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, the Zionist organization had established the Jewish National Fund, the principal tool for the colonization of Palestine at the time. Its main purpose, to purchase land for Jewish settlement, particularly.
By the way, since they're talking about Basel and Switzerland, do you know why the World Zionist Congress had to have all of its meetings in Switzerland? Because all of the chief rabbis of Germany, when they wanted to have it in Munich, right? Because, that's more central, I guess, of a location. All of the chief rabbis of all of the major cities, of 80 of them, right, signed an open letter saying we do not want the Zionists to step on German soil. We do not want them to do their stuff here. So that's why they had to stay in Switzerland. Because only Switzerland, it was like, well, if you have the money or whatever, we will let you host your little Congress thing, right? But in Germany, where they wanted to host it, right, where they thought they would be able to get like a large audience, right, because so many of the people that were involved were German Jews, right? Again, back then, right, like, they viewed this rather correctly as, a scam,
Switzerland. The Zionist organization would establish the Jewish National Fund.
And by the way, the KKL, or the Jewish National Fund, the JNF, it does this thing where it tries to make itself seem like it's like a really good charity, right? The way it does this is by saying, if you donate money, right, and this is why it has a tree, right, why it has like brown, green, then blue, right, is because it says, if you give a donation, right, we will plant a tree in Israel in your name. But there was an investigation that was done. I believe it was by The Guardian, but I could be incorrect about the venue, but it doesn't really matter. The conclusions are what matter. Is that they literally would go, right, uproot Palestinians, like their own olive trees, right, tear it away, and then plant the tree, right, with your name on it, and then take a picture and say, oh, look, we planted a tree in Israel for you. Like, think about that. Like, literally, like, oh yeah, we are going to, like, some of those olive trees go back hundreds of years, some of them even thousands, right? And they're over here just knocking them over like they're dominoes. Just so this fund here, which likes to present itself as a charity, right, particularly an eco-friendly one, right, with the whole planting of trees, because yes, planting trees good, planting trees for colonization not good, right? It's that last little bit that's just
The principle
I know, right? Soul Life.
For the colonization of Palestine.
Also, another thing too is in their own literature, it says occupation of land. In their own literature, the stuff that they would send to people. Like, this is a primary source, right? Like, this is like, for example, when if you're a historian or an academic in general, right, and you go to the archives, right? If I were to find this, right, to argue or to show, like, oh, when did the JNF ever speak about Palestine in terms of, occupying the land, right? Using language, that word, right? If I found this, that would go towards my thesis, right? That yes, this it is a colonial project, because it literally has one, right, the flow of money on one side, right, a little drawing of its building, and then everything that it does, right? Because when it did like drainage of different areas, right, it meant that like wetlands that had existed before, right, where some people could grow rice, couldn't do it anymore, because now it's all dry, right? All of these other things that were done specifically so that Palestinians could not or would be compelled to sell their land away, right? Because if they no longer have access to water, then they no longer have access to being able to grow their crops, right? So
its main purpose, to purchase land for Jewish settlement, particularly for the kibbutzim. Founder of political Zionism, Herzl, had written in 1895, "Let the owners of immovable property believe that they are cheating us, selling us things for more than they are worth, but we are not going to sell them anything back." In 1907,
what more evidence do you need? Like, there, literally, the dude whose portrait is right behind Ben Gurion, right, with the Israeli flags, right, when he's quote unquote declaring independence, that's what he said. That's literally, he himself said, yeah, this is what we're doing, right? And not like the song, right? Like, this is how we do it. It's not that, unfortunately. It's, it's colonialism how we do it, right? It's just, right? So they themselves from the beginning said it was a colonial project, right? This is the person that they literally brought his body back to the land of Israel, quote unquote, right? And buried it on top of this huge mountain called Mount Herzl, right? Which is where all like it's kind of like, like Arlington National Cemetery. It's Israel's version of that, right? Where they also bury, prime ministers and everything. But at the very top, there's this huge platform, right? And that's where they have this dude. And with what he just said, right? It's like how, like, they exalt this person as being like, if it wasn't for him, right? None of this would be here. Right, because he's the one that lobbied all over the place, right? The Ottomans, the French, the German, the Kaiser, and then the British, above all else, right? To let them do colonialism. And yet, now they're like, oh, that never happened. What are you talking about? It's just ridiculous.
7. Incorporated as a company in Britain, the JNF opened an office in Palestine, headed by a certain man, who was sent by the Zionist organization to investigate the land to be colonized. Arthur Rupin, one of the more, let's say, peculiar Zionist figures. The German Jewish sociologist, sometimes labeled by Israelis as a socialist or a covert communist, had co-founded Tel Aviv in 1909, named after Herzl's work Altneuland. Rupin, who grew up in the German Empire, drew inspiration from...
And yes, I want to make very clear, and I don't know, but Tel Aviv is named after the book by Theodor Herzl, because in Hebrew it's called Tel Aviv, right? But its actual title is in German because he only spoke German, right? Because he was from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was from lived in Vienna and everything, right? And it's actually called Alt-Neuland, which literally means alt, old, neu, new, land. So, but in Hebrew that's Tel Aviv, because tel, right, like there are different tel that are around, like the Near East, right, as it sometimes is called, right? And what it means like a mound, right? It means like where there are different layers of, like, oh, this was the city 5,000 years ago, and then this was the city that was built on top of it, and blah blah blah, right? So Tel is supposed to be something old, right? And Aviv means spring in Hebrew. So it's kind of like the whole Alt Noi, right? Like together, but whatever.
The German settlement initiative in the late 19th century in the Ostmark city of Posen, now Poznan. In this program, the Prussian government funded the relocation of German settlers to reduce the Polish majority in the region. He saw settler colonialism as the way in which Jews could cease to be despicable in his eyes. Quote, Jews do not...
Oh my gosh. Like, isn't it so weird, though, how, like, so many Zionists, right? Like, and I'm not even joking, are just so blatantly anti-Semitic. You know what I mean? Like, imagine, like, I mean, what he's saying here, right? That they do not like to work and should blah, blah, blah. Like, imagine saying that, right? Like, what are you doing, bro? Like, what are you doing? Like, I don't know.
To work and should gradually switch their livelihood to agriculture and crafts. Anti-Semites are quite right when they accuse Jews of an abnormal greed for profit.
Look at that. Look at that. Literally saying, yeah, you know what? Those, the guy over there, the guy with the mustache and, his whole little, his groupies, maybe that, like, are you joking? This is the part, like, when you really do study the history particularly from Zionism, and again, this is something that Ilan Pape goes into. This is something that Dr. Shlomo Sand goes into in the invention of the Jewish people and the invention of the land of Israel. Even Avi Shlaim, but Norman Finkelstein, of course, does this as well, and does so even in his doctoral dissertation, right? Which I think is, I personally think he should have. I mean, it would need to be revised now, but it's definitely very, very good scholarship. But regardless, right? I wondered why Tel Aviv was named that and never thought, yeah. That's why it's named that. Because the name of that area is Jaffa. Right? But they decided to make another city. Right? And they sold the plots of land to all of these, like, families, right? They bought, and now some of those families are like essentially they just became capitalists, right? Because they were capitalists, and just like made tons of money because the land now is worth, so much money, right? But like there are pictures of it back when it was literally like people standing in sand, right? Like along the beach, because they literally did not want to live in Jaffa, a city that does have a Jewish history, right? That's literally where Jonah, right? If you know the story of Jonah and the whale, that's where Jonah starts, that's where Jonah meets the whale. You know what I mean? At Jaffa. But they were like, no, we couldn't possibly live there, right? Instead, they decided to, make their own city that literally was built to be kind of like German architectural ideas like Bauhaus, which became very important in the state of Israel at that time, but also a garden city like what was happening in England. So like they didn't even build it to be like a Middle Eastern city. They built it to be like a European city along the beach, right? So...
As part of his quote-unquote scientific research, Rupin photographed Jewish people, measured their skulls, and categorized their skull shapes.
Oh my God.
In 1908, he founded the Palestine Land Development Company, PLDC, a subsidiary of the JNF, whose work...
Imagine, okay. Calipers? You're bringing out the calipers among different Jewish people? There is racism and all of this stuff within the Jewish world, right? In fact, there's a professor at Columbia that once said that the battle for the Jewish soul, or whatever, however you would like to put it, in the United States is assimilated into whiteness, white Jewish Ashkenazi men, right, and black Jewish women, right, that struggle, right, because of the downplaying of BIPOC Jews, etc., if not the complete erasure of it in American culture, right, has meant that people, and even, as I said, even in the state of Israel, there is a slur, right, that is used against Sephardi people, right, and people that are from the Middle East in general, right, and this is only done by Ashkenazi Jewish people, right, so people that come from Europe, right, who make up 17% of the population, but have been essentially 100% of all of the prime ministers, make up most of the people in power, right? So again, yes, Israel's population includes, Sephardic Jews and what are called Mizrahi Jews, right? A term created later on, but we know, when it comes to Ethiopian Jews, for example, when time was of the essence, and the chief rabbinate of Israel, which does have it has the power to decide who is and is not a Jew, according to their racial laws, I guess. They have two chief rabbis, right? They have the Ashkenazi one, right, which only is for the Ashkenazi community, solely for them. And they have the Sephardi chief rabbi that's literally for the Sephardi community, and every other community falls under his jurisdiction. Now, when it came to what happened to Ethiopian Jews, where there was a belief that there was possibly going to be a large pogrom against Ethiopian Jews, right, et cetera, right. I don't want to get too lost in the weeds. When it came up to when it was submitted to the chief rabbinate to we need to help these Jewish people. Hello, Vitingale, welcome in. The Ashkenazi one said no. So every time that they like to bring up the what we did here, what we did there, never forget that they said no. Jewish people that were in danger, and just because they weren't Europeans, they were no, we don't care. But the Sephardic chief rabbi said, okay, I will take them under my jurisdiction, and I say yes. And so that's how the transfer process occurred. Otherwise, who knows, right? But that just goes to show you that it's supposed to be a 50-50 split, but one chief rabbi has all of these communities he has to answer to. The other one, Chief Rabbi Landau, only answers to one community. Yeah, I know. Once bringing out calipers, back in the day, that's like when dudes start bringing up things like the phrase demographics, or start getting really weird about, or start saying the word birth rates or fertility rate. I just don't know, why? Just leave it alone. You know what I mean? No.
According to the founding document, was, quote, based on the methods of the Prussian Colonization Commission, which carried out a colonization process in the Prussian eastern provinces. And it was this role which would make him famous as the father of the Zionist settlement movement.
Well, look at that. So, in other words, the Zionists were trying to be like the Germans in settling the lands that they had conquered in what is now Poland, in order to make them majority German. That's what they were inspired by Prussia's conquest of parts of Poland and its movement of Germans into the area, so that then those areas would, be considered part of Germany. So that is the beginning of the settler movement, right? So just remember that. Their inspiration comes from the Prussians, right? From Germany, right? In their trying to depopulate Polish towns and move in Germans.
3 years later, he would already begin talking openly about population transfer. To this day, with huge funding from the US, the JNF keeps pushing settlement projects on Palestinian soil. The JNF has a specific mandate to developing and leasing land exclusively to Jewish people. 13% of...
Look at that. Exclusively to Jewish people. Thus, the 13% of land in Israel owned by the Jewish National Fund is by definition off limits to Palestinian Arab citizens. Think about, imagine if 13% of the land in the United States, right? That's that is at least a couple of, medium-sized states, right? Let's say California, right? California was off limits to, anybody that wasn't, an Anglo-white. You know what I mean? Like, that's literally what they're saying. Like, oh yeah, you can't even, if one of our trees is there, if one of our things is there, you can't even step on that land. Like, and also, this is important too, and this wasn't highlighted. The JNF acquired approximately 78% of its land holdings from the state between 1949 and 1953, right? Much of it the land of Palestinian refugees from the 1948 war that the state confiscated as, quote, absentee property. So the state of Israel said, oh, they no longer live there because we say so, right? And now these people have been dispossessed of their homes, and then they're like, oh, wow, why don't we give it to this organization? Right, they can only, give it, or whatever type of transaction it might be, can only be done to develop the land. Because remember, develop the land means like the stores, the roads, you know what I mean? Like I know like develop sometimes it's kind of abstract, but just really think about that. Like, oh, the land that they're developing, right, with the roads and that is off limits to Palestinians as well. So
the mostly confiscated land inside so-called Israel is owned by the JNF, making it virtually inaccessible to Palestinian citizens. Under the guise of sustainability, it also directs massive land development and afforestation projects, having planted over 240 million trees on occupied Palestine so far.
Exactly. So like as I was saying earlier, right, this is how they try to launder their whole thing. They say, hey, look, you like trees, what's your favorite kind of tree, Do you like apple trees, sir? Ma'am, what about you? Do you like, some olive trees, okay? So what we're going to do is, you're going to pay us some money, and, then we're going to go plant some trees in your name, right? And you can purchase 3, you can purchase 10, you could literally purchase an entire forest if you wanted to, right? As a charitable contribution, right? And it counts as such, like when you do your taxes. But what does it do? It literally destroys as it shows here, at least 800,000 olive, and it's higher now, it's like past 1 million now, belonging to Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. Because this source here is from the Palestinian Authority and the Applied Research Institute in Jerusalem in 2012. So 12 years ago. So the figure is much higher. It's over 1 million at this point.
Uprooting over 800,000 olive trees to plant countless pine trees, which are not indigenous to the Levant.
Exactly. So they literally get rid of people's livelihood. Like those trees are what allow people to bring olive oil, right? Bread, right? That's made with olives, right? All of the different byproducts, right? Even the mill itself, right? Or the press, I should say, itself, right? Right? Someone runs the press, right? Someone, right? And the many people that are employed, now they are out of a job. And instead they're putting in pine trees that are an invasive species because they're not from that area. They are literally they are literally putting an invasive species in Palestine, right? And you want to know something else funny? Speaking about invasive species, or stuff that the Zionists have done. The Zionists took over, right? Like the symbol that's supposed to represent Israelis, right, is supposed to be a cactus, right? It's the type of cactus, that's like flat, right? That looks like it's like leaves, right? The issue with that thing, though, is that was literally brought over from Mexico. Like their own nickname, right, for being Israeli is Sabot, right, which means cactus, right? But the cactuses, right, the cacti, right, are from Mexico. They literally stole cactus from Mexico, brought it over to Palestine, and then said, we are like this cactus. Yeah, because you're not from there, bro. That's why. Like, think about that. Like, they are literally putting in stuff that is invasive, right? In fact, in Gaza right now, and this was an interesting sign of solidarity I saw, there were people, Mexican people, and hello, Nightingale. Oh, I love that spinning heart emoji. It looks like a bubble. Really, really nice. That they were telling people like, oh, this is how you cook, right? Because Mexican people, we eat nopales, right? We eat the cactus. It's good for you. It tastes like green beans, right? Tastes like green beans, but like kind of like a cross between green beans and okra, right? Because it's kind of squidgy a little bit, right? But like literally two things. The two things that they're doing to justify their, reason why they're there are literally invasive species, right? At the very least, the good thing about cactus is that it doesn't spread like normal, right? It doesn't. Usually, the way you have another cactus is you cut off one of the leaves, as they will call them, and then you plant it in the ground, and then a new cactus will grow. It kind of, it's very different. Did y'all see the video of that Israeli guy that oh no. I saw the video of that one guy that he essentially was trying to be like, oh, I'm just filming, I'm just doing a selfie video, right? And he was trying to go into the Columbia, encampment, but like the whole time he's like moving it around, like moving himself around, and they're like, what are you doing? Oh, I just wanted to, and he got so mad on the post, right? Oh, these people, they don't care about free speech because blah blah. Bro, you were trying to dox people. You were trying to get people's faces in, and people caught you. Luckily, people that were guarding the gate, right? This is why when people say gatekeeping, right? And here is a good example of where gatekeeping can be a positive thing, right? They were wearing masks and they said, get away. They said, scram, get out of here, right? Because they could see right through what he was doing, right? Like, why are you, like, selfie video? I've never even heard, like, personally, I never even heard of that term until yesterday, till last night. I never heard of a selfie video. I was like, is that even a thing? It's like, yeah, sure, you can record yourself. But, like, selfie video, I mean, I don't know, like, usually the whole point of a selfie is, you want to think about the lighting and the, but they knew what he was trying to do, right? He was trying to get them caught on camera. So then that way he could say, oh, look, it was this person, this person, this person. But because they told him scram, oh, he's whining about free speech. They're like, oh, they don't care about free speech. Didn't see that one? Oh, yeah, it's...
And which make Palestine's natural environment highly vulnerable to ecocide, killing off many native plants in the vicinity, causing devastating losses for Palestinian farmers. National parks like the Canada Park are built on top of the rubbles of Palestinian houses and Palestinian...
And yes, it is called Canada Park. So, It's not just Americans, it's Canadians too. We know what you're doing up there. We know what you're doing up there. We can hear it, okay? We can hear it.
Blood. One southern village has been destroyed over 100 times because it's located on land where the JNF wants to plant trees.
Think about that. They've destroyed the same village 119 times. Instead of... The people just want to live their lives. They just want to live. They just want to have their homes. Like when I was in Syria, right? I spent some time with Bedouins, right? And they live in these very large tents, right? And their hospitality is very different than what a lot of other people, are used to, because it's all based on their coffee, right? They give you a cup of coffee, right? And depending on how full it is, right, like, or how they give you the coffee, right, and also they drink it at night, which, good thing in Mexico, we drink coffee at night, so, I was already prepared for that. But it's very strong coffee, I mean, like, some people even forget the fact that, like, mocha, like, that word is, like, the name of a city in Yemen. Like, Yemen, they take coffee very seriously. Like, they have all of these, like, professional tasters, and anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. But point being, they're like, their whole thing is hospitality, right? Because they're like, if we need to, like, they kind of have this almost like the Jewish style of the golden rule, right? Which is, don't do unto others what you find hateful to yourself, right? So, which is the opposite of how Christianity teaches it, right? Because in Christian thought, because they do it the opposite, do unto others what you would want done to you, that is part of their rationalization for evangelism, right? Well, I would want someone to save me and tell me about Jesus, right? So, but for Jewish people, it's the reverse, right? It's like, if you wouldn't, and in Islam as well, and in many other places as well too, right? Don't do unto others what you would find hateful unto yourself. So everything is about hospitality, right? Like, you will have a place to sleep. You will share their food, right? They will share their food with you. They will talk with you. They will try to get to know you. They will include you in everything, right? To have people, right, that want to have a home and to destroy, multiple families, enough to make a village, and to destroy it 119 times, just so that way you could send, someone a little letter, that, oh, we planted a tree in your name in Israel, right? I don't know. There's just something about that seems counterintuitive and wrong. Yeah, proselytizing, exactly. Like, because in the Christian version, it's the do what you would want to happen. That's the evangelical thought process. Because Jewish people don't evangelize, right? So,
just like there's no left Zionism, there can be no green Zionism.
There we go. Just as there is no left Zionism, there is no green Zionism. Zionism commits ecocide, and Zionism commits genocide. There is no such thing as someone who is on the left and is a Zionist. Being a Zionist means that you are okay with apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and ultimately genocide. Full stop. You cannot say, oh, well, I have some policy positions, or, oh, with Netanyahu. No. Netanyahu is a symptom. He is not the entirety. It's the entire settler colonial society that has made it so that it's okay to where people can behave this way. Because from the beginning, it's always been about taking, usurping, right? So, again, there are no left-wing Zionists. Labor Zionism literally just means, kind of like, oh, we like the Norwegian model, right? I mean, to use a kind of, like when people look to Scandinavia, yeah, they do have a lot of social democratic things that seem nice, but the price is the imperialism of the global south, right? And here, yeah, they can talk about, trees, and they can talk about whatever, but it comes at the cost of the lives of the Palestinians and their homes.
At the beginning of the new century, Palestine was an agricultural society, and the new Jewish landlords would need the tenants to continue cultivating their lands. Many from the first wave of settlers during the so-called First Aliyah would prefer to hire Arab workers, since those were cheaper, and for their deep knowledge of the land of Palestine and methods of farming its problematic soil. But this...
Oh, look at that. Look at that. They hired the Palestinians because they actually live there. They actually knew the land. They knew how it worked, right? That's the difference, right? Indigenous people have a relationship to the land that they are on. They know it. And that is something settler colonists do not understand. It's not, look at my kick-ass, back porch. No, it's not that. It's the ability to eke out a living, even in the worst of circumstances, in a part of the world, right, that is, not the most, easy to deal with in terms of climate, right, in terms of, like, for growing plants, right? There's not a lot of water available, right? So to do this literally disproves all of the other arguments that, they're indigenous, Zionists are not indigenous to anywhere. Because Zionism is an ideology. But these people literally go to Palestine, hire Palestinians, because they don't know how their apparently ancestral lands work, right? Because if you were to read the Torah, right? I have the Tanakh right there. I mean, I am a rabbi after all, right? If you were to follow those rules step by step in the land of Israel, quote unquote, right? Your farm would fail. Because again, it's not like literal directions for what to do, right? But the first Aliyah, right, already proves the point that the Palestinians have been saying. You're not indigenous. You hired us, and you came here under false pretenses, and then you used us, right? So that then once you gain some acclamation to this land, right, then you could try to claim that it was yours all along, right? Those animals are so skinny. Yeah. I mean, for those being oxen, right, it's a hard life, right? Like in the global south, being a subsistence farmer, it's very hard. It's not easy. Like in America, right, there are people that that they become preppers, and they get, these raised beds, and they get all this, mulch and soil, and they get a composter and all that stuff, right? And it's like, that's a luxury. In most of the world, it's still dependent upon rain, right? Still dependent upon rain. And so that's why, like, the exploitation of the Palestinians to then steal from them, right? This is why the justice that will be brought down, right, is something that will have to be immense. Because again, this is generational suffering, right? The usage of the labor of a people, right, just so then you could steal the land that they knew how to work, right, the land they had a connection with, from them.
Was not what the important kibbutz and JNF leaders wanted. Yosef Weitz was the director of the Land and Afforestation Department of the JNF, making its intentions clear. It is our right to transfer the Arabs. The Arabs should go. He would later write, quote, "The only solution is a land of Israel devoid of Arabs. There is no room here for compromise.
Remember, this is the charity that you can donate to. And this is the leader of that charity. Remember that. Remember that when people talk about, they do good work because they plant trees. But at what cost, right? Like, imagine the gall to say that, right? But again, that's precisely how this operates, right? From the beginning, they've been explicit. But everybody, oh, but you know, but the Grand Mufti of the Mufti position is a hereditary one. He was there just because he was there. He didn't even have any power, and he was only there because, again, the British were the ones that allowed him to be there, right? So whatever he said is completely irrelevant compared to literally what leaders of what are even to this day registered as charitable organizations in the United States, right, are doing, right, and have said, and have it in their mission statement, so to speak. Like, wherever we purchase land, that land cannot belong, or Arabs cannot live there, cannot be there. So, again, even here, right, Veit says, quote, there is no room for compromise. They all must be moved, end quote.
All must be removed. Not one village can remain, and not one tribe. Only through this transfer of the Arabs living in the land of Israel will redemption come. While Theodor Herzl had formulated the goal to create a Jewish state, he did not articulate a concrete, practical plan for settlement in Palestine. This had to be done by the pseudo-socialist settlers of the second Aliyah, who came with big utopian dreams and who would be at the frontier of Zionist colonization.
What's funny though is that the fact that they're saying, you know, I'm glad that they used the term pseudo-socialist, because that's actually a good term. There are lots of pseudo-socialists, right? You know, all over the place. But what I think is important to keep in mind is that their utopian vision, utopian vision came as a dystopia for everybody else, right? For everybody that lived there. Like, in order to have a utopia, right, it demanded to create a dystopia for everybody that already lived there. And one thing that I think is really important here too is that the difference between, say, like, the only real difference between the United States, Australia, New Zealand, etc., is that Israel is still in a phase of settler colonialism that the United States had finished, well before, right? We had cameras and, before the 20th century. Like number 9 and feeling fine. Nice. But instead, again, anything that has something built in with dispossession, anything, is not socialist. That is why you have to be intersectional. You have to be. I don't care, Mr. Finkelstein, I don't care I only deal in facts, okay? And now I'm only going to tell you one thing. Intersectional leftism is the only true current of leftism. Okay?
Palestine. In the last video, we introduced the Poale Zion, the key socialist Zionist organization, led by the most important Zionist, David Ben-Gurion, the founder of Israel. One of the founders of Poale Zion in Poland would become a key leader of the kibbutz movement, a young man from today's Belarus who cited Karl Marx as one of his influences. His name, Yitzhak Tabenkin. He arrived in Palestine in 1912 and started working in one of the Zionist agricultural settlements, joining the Hashomer militia and becoming one.
Isn't it funny how they literally begin to even dress like the indigenous people, right? Like, this proves, right, that, you cannot dress like some, Berliner, right? You cannot dress as though you live, in Gdansk. You can't be walking around in a suit. You know what I mean? Like, all of that, fashion from... Oh, right, you read my mind. I looked up at the TV, saw you on Twitch, and thought, I'm about to do... So what's important here is, again, like, these people committed acts of terror. whenever they could and got away with it in many, many cases, right? Whenever they could, they would do it, and especially under British control, right? So all of the whining that they're going to say, oh, well, the British, they made us do this, they limited. Yeah, it was wrong that Britain and the United States did not take in, and other countries in the world did not take in all of the Jewish refugees. That is the problem. Not that the British stopped emigration to Palestine of Jewish people during the war. No, it's that Britain didn't open its doors for the Jewish people and the other people that were suffering from the Holocaust. Why didn't that happen? Why didn't Sweden open its doors? It was a neutral country. Why did you know what I mean? And yet, what's happening here in this, what we're like, they literally start to LARP as though they are Arabs, Palestinians.
One of the founders and the spiritual leader of the first kibbutz proper, in Harod, which would later become a center of the kibbutz movement. The idyllic-looking place has a dark history. It was built on land formerly belonging to the Palestinian villages Kumye and Tamra. Yosef Weid.
This is very common. This is very, very common. In fact, if we do, I'm hoping maybe if I wish I knew how to edit things, myself, but I really want to get a version of the Tantua documentary, because I kid you not, there's only one building left in that kibbutz. And it's funny because at the beginning of the documentary, right, they have all these, the old people, right, the senior citizens that are 70s, whatever, and they start talking about, before, we used to live side by side with blah blah blah, and then blah, and then and then they kind of skip a couple of years, and then it's like, oh, and then we would go out and, we'd sit at these tables and we would dance by the beach. It's like, no. What happened between 48 and 49? Oh, well, there was some blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, why is there only one building left of all the buildings of Tantua? And why is it completely empty? What happened to all the other buildings? And all the people? Right? Okay, no worries.
Of the JNF would order the depopulation of Kumye as part of Operation Gideon in 48. Tabenkin rejected the idea that a Jewish state would suffice to materialize the Zionist vision in the whole land of Israel, and advocated a bottom-up approach for socialist Zionism. His ambitious dream envisioned the entire Jewish people living in communes as part of a worldwide alliance of communist peoples. Though, as it turns out... this is the thing, right? There are people that claim to be anarchists and they say, oh, we have collectives. Fascists have collectives. I don't know what to tell you. Fascists will do shit like this too. I don't know. I don't understand why people think oh, well, we were going to do this. It's not about, right, whether you do it like this or whether you do it like that. It's whether or not, right, you have, horizontal power, right, dual power, etc., right, other things to make sure that there isn't any dispossession, any, unnecessary hierarchies, whatever, right? Just having a group of people live together, in different communes, that doesn't do anything. Again, there are many people who live that way and who are, super right wing, right? Even the polygamous cults, right? I hate having dishwater and everyone put the dishes in the sink. Oh my goodness. I know what you mean though. His glorious worldwide alliance did not happen to include the indigenous inhabitants of the land.
Oh, look at that. Oh, so we're going to have communes all over the world, but it's not going to include the indigenous peoples. Do you see the problem then when people try to tell you that there is such a thing as a left Zionist? A socialist Zionist? That the kibbutz are actually something we should be looking at as a model for?
And he sought to colonize, of course, the Palestinians. In their efforts to secure Western support for their project, designers
By the way, the dude on the left here is Chaim Weizmann, who later became the president, or is that Shimon Wiesenthal? And this is Chaim Weizmann. I want to say that's Chaim Weizmann, anyway.
propagated the slogan of a land without a people for a people without a land.
Right, and let's see, who said it? Soul Life, you said it. Yeah. Like, this is something that has been said over and over. I mean, this has been said about the United States, right? Like, they declared that it was terra nullius, right? Same thing with Australia. They declared it to be so. It's a legal fiction, right? They created the category and then said this is part of that category. So therefore, all, it's the same thing like when you have people that are, fascists and they try to argue like, well, since the indigenous people didn't adhere to like early modern liberal ideas of property, right, that like, oh, well, it doesn't matter, right, because like we have our own property system and they didn't believe in it, so blah blah blah. It's like, it doesn't even make sense.
Prominent British Jewish writer Israel Zangwill had coined it. He served as the spokesman of the Zionists in Britain.
By the way, Israel Zangwill, very important person. Do you know, if you have ever lived in the United States, you most certainly have heard this following phrase, right? That the United States is a melting pot, right? Melting pot. Israel Zangwill, who never visited the United States, never set foot here. He's the one that wrote the play called The Melting Pot, about the United States being a melting pot. But it's interesting how the United States gets to be a melting pot, at least, ideally, right? But, of course, Palestine can't, right? Because the issue has never been Jewish people living in Palestine. In fact, there were many times in history where the majority of people in just Jerusalem, right, not necessarily all of Palestine, right, where, because, populations go up and down, right, over time, right, where Jewish people made, plurality, or, sometimes some people claim a majority, right, but that didn't require an ethno-state, right? So why is it that Israel Zangwill, for the United States, oh, it's a melting pot, we all come together, we all become this American culture, right, which, is not really true, right, because there were certain people that are never allowed to, right, truly become part of American culture. And what American culture means is usually whiteness, right? Like, if you can be assimilated into whiteness, then you are American, right? So, there's a big problem in that, because the indigenous people, Mexican people, and black people, right, in the United States are three peoples that can never cross that line, right? Because the racial ideologies that have shaped, our current, undergird our current racialist system in the United States, the white supremacist one, right, have been ones that, are by definition anti-indigenous, anti-black, et cetera, so, and anti-Jewish too. I don't know, but
Just like the Afrikaners anti-land theory, justifying.
See, it's funny because I was like, oh, I don't want to keep mentioning South Africa, because if I keep mentioning South Africa, I've made a because many times people will say, oh, you overemphasize South Africa and all of that stuff, but the thing is that it's true though. That's the way how the Afrikaners, right, the Boers, right, that's how they were able to claim all of their land, right? Ironically, whiteness isn't a culture, precisely, right? That's why, right? Whiteness, if anything, tends to be the exact opposite in many senses, right? One could argue, right? I'm not necessarily saying that myself, But that is something that people have argued before, right? That it is by definition anti-cultural, right? Because it seeks to flatten identity, right? And to bifurcate it into white and not white. So
Colonization in South Africa, or other thieves utilizing the concept of terra nullius to occupy land.
this is a good book to read. And in fact, it's funny because I was saying, I focused on terra nullius, right? Was something that you can see. I don't have it. Let me see. It shouldn't say it on this map. I think this map is too modern. Yeah, this map is too modern. Commonwealth of Australia. But back in the day, right? Back in the day, that's what they used to. That's just what they would put here on top of Australia, is terra nullius. And then if you go back into older maps, right, of the Americas, when they didn't really know how the Americas looked, they would call this terra nullius and then this terra nullius, right? So it goes back a long ways, right? This idea that like, the land is empty, right? And part of that also comes from, actually from liberalism, right? Because then the reason why you have, right, this extending into the 19th century, right, and taking the form it takes now, right? Like, this group of people weren't, they weren't building up their economy. They weren't blah, blah, blah. That is from that is from a utilitarian point of view, right? That is an argument by utility, right? That like, unless, and in fact, there's actually a piece called "The Discovery of Guyana" by Sir Walter Raleigh, right? And you can read it if you want to. I think it's worth reading but when he gets to what is Guyana, right, which is a country that is right here, it's the only English-speaking country in South America, right? It's right next to Venezuela, right? Okay, thank you so much, Vitingale, for lurking. All of that, that was, Guyana, when he gets there, he literally sees everything only by the way of capitalism, right? Look at how many acres that we could grow wheat to sell at the market. Look at how many trees we could chop down to build ships to increase our commerce, right? It's those arguments that then when you get to someone like John Stuart Mill, right, who wrote, on utilitarianism, right, then that's the argument from utility, right? That, they weren't using the land correctly, right? Whatever that means, right? And you still hear these arguments all the time, right? This is something that's, because it's something that develops a little bit like later, right? It still is with us in a more, more original forms, and to some extent, right? Literally, they weren't doing anything with it, right? So therefore, that allows me to take it, right? That is obviously a logical fallacy, obviously, on many, many ways, but that is the underlying logic, right? That, if according to capitalist utilitarian principles, right, you are not being productive, quote unquote, then you forfeit your right of deed, right? So, yeah, I don't know how to do the commands on YouTube.
The Zionists did not literally mean that there were no people there.
By the way, the Arabic right here is Palestine, just so you know, because it does say La Palestine in French. Et obviously, si vous voudriez, je peux parler seulement en français, mais je préfère quand je parle en anglais dans mes streams, right? But I might have to set up the stream elements so live for YouTube on its own, like afterwards. But do make sure that you join if you are not already. If you are not already, make sure to join the Discord, so that way you could help me with that, because I would be more than happy. For people to do that. Nightbot TV step 1, it requires login to your YouTube account through their website, so I can't do that. Okay. Well, regardless, just letting you know, like, you can always go into the Discord, and then, we can chat there afterwards if I need to do something special. Okay. Which, by the way, I've got to say, I've always been a really big fan of many different textiles and everything. But I remember once when I was in Syria, I'm looking at the head covering that you see right here, and I saw something very similar to that. Yeah, like I don't remember ever actually like going in and signing in for the YouTube side. So, mainly because I only started dual streaming very recently, so. But make sure to like and subscribe and let your friends know, let everybody know, so that way I can get to 1,000 subscribers, so then I can finally raid people, because, and also, get monetized. Because, sorry, I don't mean to riff off, but like, by the way, I didn't mean to put it like, oh, you have to give me 1,000. No, I was just joshing around. But the point being that, like, my job contract's about to be done, right? Like, that's the thing about being in academia, the way how I am, right? It's contractual work. And once it's over, once the school year's over, once I turn in those final grades, right, in a month or so, right, it's over, right? So then my main income becomes streaming, and usually summer is when I stream the most, like, by far. So that's why I'm trying to see. That's why I started early, trying to do the whole YouTube and stuff like that. But anyway, not to go off on that, because I know people don't want to hear that.
What they meant was that the people there didn't matter. When asked by Rupin about what to do with the Palestinian Arabs, Zionist organization chief Chaim Weizmann replied, "The British told us that there are there some 100,000.
Thank you so much,
For
Solai.
those, there is no value. Denying the existence of Palestinians is not a thing of the past. Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich said, I think that we've had an invented Palestinian people who are in fact Arabs.
Like, imagine being that. Like, that is cruel, right? Like, imagine saying that, like, oh, I think we invented this people that are blah blah, Mexicans, but they're actually just, like, imagine saying that about one of the most oppressed people that have lived under a constant state of siege, hyper surveillance, violence for decades, if not longer, one could say, right? I mean, that's definitely what Rashid Khalidi argues in the book, right? And also, I really like the Spanish covering of it. The American one is fine. It's fine, it has Jerusalem in the back, but I like also that it has a kafiyah. I don't know. I just think, to me, that's a nice little, because oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's just, it's one of those things, being an academic is not, especially right now, like being an academic and, being pro-Palestine, it's one of those things where it's like, we won't give you a contract if we find out that you're at the, they're not saying it, but you can definitely feel it.
Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee said after a trip to Palestine, quote, "There's really no such thing as the Palestinians."
Like, imagine saying to, like, going up to Americans and be like, there's no such thing as Americans. There's no such thing as Floridians. I think that we've invented a group of people named Floridians that are actually just, Alabamans. Right? Like, of course it's not the same, right? But it's like that that what they're doing is actually one of, so people know, right, that typically speaking, right, there are 10, this is something that's, it's a heuristic. And what I mean by that is that it's like a way to teach people how genocide can occur, right? But it's not like one, it's like a video game where you like, you do one and then you can go to level 2. No, it doesn't work that way. All 10 of them are happening at the same time in different places, right? Like, people are denying the existence of the Palestinians in Washington, D.C., but the IDF is also destroying the home. You know what I mean? Like, it's all going on at the same time, right? And denying the existence of Palestinians, right, which is something that right-wing, even Benny Morris, right, who, again, his books on the subject, when it comes to talking about, a lot of the stuff, right, like, he does document, things from the archive that show, that there were these mass expulsions and blah, blah, blah. The issue is that he thinks that it was necessary. That's the problem, right? He thinks it was a good thing that there were mass. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Adrian Vixen. Thank you so much for the raid. Welcome in, Raiders. Welcome in, Streamer. Hello. Hello, Nabil. Hello, everyone. I'm Shakespeare, member of Transcend TV. And right now, and I'm a cultural historian, and I'm doing a teach-in, right, in solidarity with the protesters. Hello, Carla. Welcome in. Oh, I'm doing good, Nabil. Thank you so much. I hope that you're doing better. I'm doing a teach-in here on stream, right, in solidarity with the people of Palestine, who, again, indeed. But as I was saying, oh, that's good to hear. So, so this stream, if you'd like to, please make sure to refresh that, so that way that you get counted as a viewer. Oh, thank you. There you go. And I'm a cultural historian, and I want to do this. I'm doing teach-ins, as often as I can, in solidarity with the Palestinian people and also the student and faculty protesters, as well as the other protesters currently ongoing around the world. So, yes. Yes, hello. Welcome in, Dead and Joker. I appreciate it.
You would think the so progressive left Zionists would choose nicer words. Kibbutzim leader Tabenkin later described the Palestinian national movement as a Nazi movement with...
Yes, that is true. I am multi-streaming, so if you could go to YouTube and give it a thumbs up and subscribe, that would be awesome. I would appreciate that.
Which there was no chance for compromise.
So like the origin of calling the Palestinians, right, and their movement for liberation, and this comparison was done by a supposed left Zionist, right? Socialist, right? Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Hello, Near Riot. Hello. Yes, and I want this to be an inclusive and safe learning environment. So, anything, that you need, any questions you want answered, anything like that, you're more than welcome.
The most important labor Zionist leader, along with Ben-Gurion and Tabenkin, Berl Katznelson, the guy left Zionists point to as a nice, by nationalism respecting Israeli leftist, would speak of the typical Arab bloodlust and called Palestinian nationalism Nazism.
So again, this goes back to before the founding of the State of Israel. This is from a 1936 speech, right? But you know what it does show too, right? It shows that even though there are other people that want to deny this, it shows that people knew what was going on in the occupied territories of Nazi Germany against people like Jewish people. So that's something to keep in mind, right? Like, they're saying this in 36 after the Nuremberg laws go into effect, right? Which are not only the racial laws that later Israel will adopt for its own, determining who's Jewish, as opposed to who's Aryan, but also this is when all of the Jewish people living in Germany became stateless, right? This is why, right, the idea of refugees and their ability to not to be held as, to not be hindered, right, in their desire to go to whichever country they want, not the first country that they step foot in, whichever destination they want, and by whatever means, and cannot be held against them according to international law, was started after this, right? So he's blaming the Palestinians, right? Katznerson says nothing about the United States denying the Exodus, right? The boat, right, that had, hundreds of, at least 300 Jewish people that tried to escape, that were lied to and given false visas by a Cuban diplomat, right? And were not allowed to, get off in Havana Harbor, right? And then they try to go to Miami. No, can't go there. Try to go to New York. Nope, can't go there. The captain of that ship was even willing to drive it into, right, to crash it into the rocks, right, into the shore in England or France, right, just so then he would not have to return to Germany. Why? Because the captain of the ship, right, was an anti-Nazi. He was an anti-fascist. He hated Hitler, to the point where, even though by German law, as long as they were in German waters, they had to keep up the portrait of Der Führer, right? The very moment that they were out of German waters, they smashed it to the ground, right? Thinking, alas, we're finally free, only to not be given safe harbor anywhere in the world. And most of them that were allowed to, that were able to get off the ship, were dropped off in countries that Nazi Germany would invade about a year and a half later. So remember that, right? America could have taken all of the people in, right? All of the countries in the world could have taken people in, but they want to blame Palestinians particularly for this, when it's not their fault, right? The United States had racial laws, the 1924 Immigration Act, right? The Immigration and Exclusion Act, right? That meant that, right, that there was a quota on the amount of people from certain parts of Europe, right? Particularly coded Jewish people, right? Now America tries to be, we are the heroes of the world, YouTube isn't worthy of sharing screen space with Twitch, even though it's a failing business. Oh, I know. I wish I knew how to do like how Irene has it, where it's like everybody, but.
Quote, Arab fascism and imperialism and Arab Hitlerism.
Like, think about that. Think about saying that in 1937, right? When the actual Hitler himself, right? Hitler himself is out there on a genocidal campaign against the Jewish people, right? And remember, the Jewish Agency for Palestine, right? The Zionist organizations that were there in Palestine at the time, before the war started, they even invited Eichmann, before the State of Israel was even founded. They invited Eichmann, of all people, to come visit Palestine. They actually have a coin that says Ein Nazi im Palestine, because they had Eichmann, the guy literally that was brought back in 1961 to be tried, right? Because he was known as the chief architect, or one of the chief architects, however people want to word it, of the final solution. They invited him over. And yet they dare to try to say, the Palestinians, they are like, and they still do this. This was in 1937. People knew what was going on in Europe. And yet they were blaming it on innocent people.
When the second Aliyah settlers arrived, the leftist Zionists were disgusted at the Arab workers toiling at Jewish collectives who made themselves dependent on philanthropy money. Employment of Arab workers was rejected, since it worked against the creation of a self-sustaining Jewish.
So, this is where the idea of like socialism, right, quote unquote, comes into play, right? Well, it was socialism, quote unquote, but only for it was a national one, right? As in, it only benefited one of the two nations. Well, one of the many nations, but still, one of the two nations, right, in Palestine, right? And that's the problem, right? Yeah, they subsidized this, they bought them that, blah, 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 blah. They could live like this, right? If they wanted to live in a farm, they could do that. By the way, if you'd like to help me with my research, you can always go to my throne, right? I have a book over here by Aaron Zavengraf. Very interesting. It's already partially funded. If you'd like to help me out. But also, if you'd like to help me as well, you can also do so by subscribing to the channel. So that way you don't have to suffer through ads. Socialism for the upper class, capitalism for everyone else. Even worse. Essentially indentured servitude, really.
Agricultural class, which could not form unless the Jews had their own territory. A new model.
Again, this is the thing, right? Everything comes down to who has control over, right, the arable land, right? Because the land right up here to the Kinneret, or the Sea of Galilee, right, which is this big lake, right, is the Jezreel Valley, right, going all the way up here. So many clearings, as some people would call it, right, or pogroms against Palestinians happened here. Exactly. That's why, hence the yes. It was a socialism of a national sort.
Was needed to bring self-redemption through physical work, close connection to the land, and to other members of the community.
Look at that. So, here we go. So they recognized that they did not have a relationship with the land. So they had to force one. They had to make one happen by excluding the Palestinians, right? Let's drain these wetlands. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's plant trees. Blah, blah, blah. But even they themselves, we actually don't know how to live here. Okay, then you're not indigenous then. Okay, all of your leaders back in the day are saying we're not indigenous here. We need to develop a sense of the land. Blah 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 blah. It's like that picture from the other one, right, where they end up starting to dress like Arabs of the time, even like Bedouins. Like they literally have to dress like the indigenous people because them wearing European fashion. Right, they're just sweating like crazy. Right, what kind of person wants to go around all schwitzy everywhere? Just no.
The Zionist settlers were weak. Strong, closely knit collectivism would fulfill.
And claiming the land was uninhabited, even though they needed to ethnically cleanse, transfer. Yeah, can't recall now a huge number of people for their plans. Right, the amount of people is about 800,000. But that's an estimate. right? It's the same thing like with when it comes to like historical events like this, we will never know like 1-to-1 at the exact number, right? The estimates is about 800,000. Could be more, could be, but it is no less than 800,000, right? It's the same thing like with something like what happened with the Holocaust, right? Like the reason why you might have been raised being taught 6 million Jewish people and 12 million people total is because that's what was taught at the time. But historians have actually raised the number because more evidence has, like, people have found more mass graves, right? Same thing what's going to happen in Gaza, right? Like when Bezras Hashem, this genocide finally ends, right? And Palestine is finally liberated. There are going to be so many people that are unaccounted for. Like the number we have, the 35,000, 36,000 people, that's the lowest estimate because that's confirmed by a morgue, by the Ministry of Health. That's just, think about everybody else. The children, the elderly, the disabled, and everybody else that was caught under the rubble just trying to live their lives. We will never know the true number, but the number is far higher than people think. Far, far higher. Some people say 2 times higher, some people say 3. I've been hearing up to 4, and maybe even 5 times higher. I don't know, right? I'm just going off of what I've read myself. The academic literature tends to be a bit more conservative, right? It tends to say, 3 times, perhaps. But even 3 times, 90,000 people is a lot of people, right? That never deserved not 1 second of the horrors that they have had to live through, right? Of being in an open air concentration camp, right? Like that. Like Ilan Pape's book, when he titled it, the largest prison on the earth, or whatever. He's not wrong, right? That is what it is. What else could you call it? Let's see here. Let me read chat because I know I went a little bit on a riff right there. And claiming the land was uninhabited, even though they needed to, right? Yeah, and you're right. We just went over that. A country without a people for a people. A land without a people for a people without a land. Yeah. Ages ago, I was told much smaller numbers. It's increasing ever since I first started hearing and reading about this. Oh yeah. Like, again, we do not know because one, right? Like, in order for them to be counted in the official tally, they have to be first declared missing, right? In one sense, and then be identified in a morgue at a hospital, right? And then that be communicated to the Ministry of Health. Do you see since Israel has been attacking hospitals, right? That makes this last part and the middle, that makes this little process here a little difficult, right? So that's why the numbers are far greater than we might think. Yes, they are confirmed and identified, right? That is that they can see that someone reported that this person was missing and that they were able to identify them, had family. So if the whole family, is gone, then nobody can verify who they are. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where if there is no next of kin, then you can't verify, So this is why, again, like when it comes to something like genocide, right? For historians, we know that the number that we say is going to be revised far, far higher as time goes on. And it hasn't been increasing very much the last couple of months. That's not due to, right, exactly. It's not because of the roadblocksing and the, unaliving, but that the infrastructure and the bureaucracy, right? And yes, thank you for shouting out Neuro Riot. Involved with counting has been destroyed, right? Particularly the hospital side, right? the hospital side, right? Because without that, then we don't have morgues, right? Like, where do you put people to be preserved so they can be identified? Well, really nowhere, because Israel cut off electricity. So, that means that, the refrigerators and, the stuff like that, like the stuff that they show in TV shows, right? Or where they just pull out you can't have that if you don't have electricity, right? You can't, email away, all that stuff if you don't, So, and also the destruction of records is also part of genocide, right? Like that's the problem that people don't recognize, is like, from the historical perspective, right? Ecocide. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh, thank you so much, NeuroRiot. Thank you so much for the subscription. I appreciate it very much. Yes, let's go. Thank you. Because they destroyed the Central Archive of Gaza, right? That means that people who are historians, right, who are anthropologists, who are, etc., sociologists, can no longer go there and see the documents that talk about the people, right? Same thing with, like, the church, right? The Church of St. Porphyrius, right? That is literally the third oldest church in the world, right? And that there are families there that have been Christian since, early on. I'll put it like that, right? The records of the church, right? Think of it. Think of the fact that all of the baptismal records, all of the wedding records, all of the gone. Same thing in the Central Archive. That is part of genocide. That is part of genocide. Because there is not just ecocide, there is also epistemicide, right? Hence the destruction of universities, right? So, but yeah. Ages ago was in reference to the Nakba. It applies for what's going on. Right, exactly. And in fact, actually, it's a really good documentary that I've gone over before, but I actually might go over it again because it's germane to this discussion, right? Where, as they did in 1948, right, where they declared land to be absentee, right? Because of the war, because people didn't, stay in their house while they were being shot at, right? And they left, right, out of fear of being, roadblocked. They declared those homes essentially abandoned, right? Abandoned property. This is something that we just went over in the video. And there's actually a very famous activist, and right now her name escapes me. But she actually gets a chance to go back. She's Palestinian, and she used to live in Jerusalem. And her father was working on the first Arab English dictionary, right? That it was in both languages. The first one ever. She went back to the house, after everything, after, the Nakba and everything that's happened. This happened years ago. I want to say it's 2012. And she goes right up to the house and she tries to knock on the door, maybe they might let me inside. Or just, obviously they ignore her. And there's this part where she says, this tree, the same tree is still here. And it's this lemon tree. And it just made me think of my grandparents' home, right? Like, oh, they're lime trees, right? This thing, right? This physical, palpable thing that connects, right? That has a long history like that, right? And it's still there. And, it was a very sad moment, right? She finally gets to see her house after decades of not being able to. And not only is it occupied by, settlers, but everything that was in there was intellectual property, so to speak, right? And what I mean intellectual, I mean books, right? Books. all of the books, the manuscripts, the art, all of that stuff was confiscated, so to speak, by the what became the IDF, right? And they actually write on the spine of the book AP, which stands for abandoned property. They declared it abandoned. The Israelis did. The Palestinians never said that they didn't want it. The Israelis said that they abandoned it because of, what happened. So, yeah, I will go over that one because it's a very good documentary that goes over the fact that, yes, the way they destroyed those central archives, I was like, this is a big deal, bigger than was portrayed by even many pro-Palestine outlets, I felt anyway. Oh, for sure. Again, if you're a historian or a sociologist or, and you work in the social sciences or even a humanist, right? You need to have access to archives, especially, and again, this is just me speaking, as a historian, that's what you do. You go into the archives and you look at documents, right? Because history is not just random factoid, ding, 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 ding. That's not what it is, right? It's not a trivia. It's looking at documents and trying to see, right, all of the vastness of what's going on, right? And now that's impossible. Because this, whatever the center, and you know what, the Israelis did this too, when they destroyed the PLO research center, the Palestinian Research Center, when they invaded Lebanon in '82, right? The PLO started a research center, right, where they decided to bring, where it was a library and an archive, right? And in fact, there is a press, an academic but leftist press, technically commercial academic, but still, which means that they're not a university press, right? That they're going to come out with documents from the PLO from that time period, and I'm looking forward. I try to see if I could get review copies, but it's already hard enough trying to get these books out on time, apparently, because of what's going on. But even when they invaded Lebanon, the IDF made sure to try to destroy the PLO research center, which you can look up. It's there, right? It was there in Beirut, and even the Journal of Palestine Studies or the other things like that, right? That sort of spun off of the need to record and all of that stuff. A lot of it came as a response to the fact that so much was destroyed, right? The IDF was willing to invade another country, right, and destroy the archives there too. So Malala? No. It wasn't Malala. Malala's from Afghanistan. Zachary Foster visited an antique shop in Gaza weeks before October 7th, which probably had the largest private archive of historical Palestinian documents. It no longer exists. It's been bombed. I really wish people understood just how much this is literally genocide. I hate people trying to argue that it's not because, oh, well, look at this graph, it's line up. There are people that say, oh, if the Holocaust were happening now, I would have done this XYZ thing, right? And they're doing the exact opposite, which tells you all you need to know. That they say that they said what they said just for show. There are so many documents, so many books, so many things that you just will never get to read now. Lives of people in Palestine that we will never get to know that they ever existed. Because Jared Kushner wants to have beachfront property because he thinks it's going to have, good land value. Zachary Foster is an American Jewish historian journalist with a focus on the Middle East and Palestine in particular. Yeah. In fact, I think he's published in the Journal of Palestine Studies, if I'm not mistaken. The sadness in his voice the first time he spoke. I mean, it's. I cannot tell you how horrified. Like I am. Like I'm honestly stunned just like thinking about it. Like, you know, because so many archives and so many, you know, like, I'm someone who takes archiving very seriously, right? To the point where, you know, at the places that I work at, right, the institutions that I work at, I always speak with the librarians. I always, you know, if they have, you know, their unique or / special collections, and, you know, because so many places around the world, you know, like this happened with, I mean, the callousness by which it happens, right? That it's literally just destroyed in an instant. It's like how many eternities have just been, you know, and it's not a good feeling. So yeah, I mean, I know that Rashid Khalidi's family has their own archive as well, like their own like library, but they live in Jerusalem, right? So in Al-Quds, so it's different. But I can't even imagine like an entire, like the central archive of Gaza and the largest private archive. I mean, I can't even fathom. That's just like, you know. I'm just gonna put it like this: books, the written word, and, you know, documents are central not only to my profession, but also just to my life, right? And in some ways, like, you know, when I've gone into the archive and been reading about people and their lives and what they went through, etc., right? Their letters, their, you know, looking at their birth certificate, whatever it is, right? To think that those things could just, in a heartbeat, just go away, is like, I don't even know. It's like unbelievable. It's like how, you know, like how could someone's, the, you know, the documents that show that this person was alive, that they lived a life, that they existed, gone, you know? And I just, same thing too, like with actions, like, you know, a lot of times, like the reason why we know so much of what happened at Tantura is because, you know, or at other places like at Deir Yassin, is because, you know, people that lived, so to speak, to tell the tale. And, you know, losing it all at once is, I mean, it shows one thing, and it shows that, again, capitalism and imperialism and settler colonialism do not care about knowledge, right? Don't ever let yourself think, right, that Harvard cares about knowledge, right? They support settler colonialism for a reason. And I apologize, I didn't mean, it's just, you know, again, as someone for whom documents and books and all of those things are like central to my profession as a historian, it's kind of like, it's hard, right? Like I can't even imagine, right? Oh, thank you so much, Fighting Gale. Let's see here. And I apologize. I didn't mean to just... it's just so sad. in Iraq when the U.S. invaded so many. I am actually going to cover a documentary that goes over that. So that actually talks about how like remember when Hobby Lobby was sued because their owners bought artifacts from like Babylonian artifacts, right, from the gray market, as it's called. Right, genocide isn't only killing. Obliteration of culture is also a genocidal act. Right, I mean, technically, genocide is a crime. You don't even have to kill a single person for it to be a genocide. I mean, I wish people understood that. Oh my goodness. Welcome in. Red Rust, hello. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the raid. I appreciate it. Welcome in, Raiders. I'm Shakespeare. I am a cultural historian, emphasis on Jewish history in Latin America. And right now we're currently going over the history of Palestine and, the kibbutzim. And we were just talking right now about the destruction of archives in a heartbeat. Like, it's just, it really makes you think in some ways too, right? Like, if you think about it, imagine if all the documents that say you exist were gone. How would you prove that you exist? You know what I mean? It's just like that's why, I mean, I don't mean to, that's why, like, the people that want to, anyway, I'll just, it's so much knowledge, culture, potential gone. I mean, yeah. And sorry, I didn't mean Red Rust to immediately get be very emotional. It's just, oh gosh, sorry. Hamas used it as historical documents shield. What? Oh, it's very sobering and it's a good reminder for everyone. Wait. Oh. So people. Ooh, I like that. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And I don't care what you say, Norman. I don't care what you say, Mr. Finkelstein. I will say it. Okay? Well, I don't care what you say. I only deal in facts. And what you said, sir, was wrong. So it's not mispronouncing, right? People can call me, and Weitingale knows this as well, right? That Irene, right, because we've been friends for a long time, because we both speak French, right, has always said my name in a kind of like a French way, right? So you can say either Shakespeare, right, or Shakespeare. Either one is fine with me. Both of them are acceptable. I just, so humans. Oh, I see. Yes, indeed. I like our meows.
The need of the Zionist movement to compensate for its relative weakness at the time. The colonizers of North America had the frontier, and the sturdy homesteaders who settled it, building.
It's interesting because the idea of the frontier in America, it's such a myth. Like it's like even beyond a myth. Like, for example, like the whole idea of cowboys, right? Is literally, and thank you so much, Frank and Panty. I appreciate the hugs. Yeah, did people homestead? Yes, blah, blah, blah. But most homesteaders actually did not last the full time that they were supposed to stay there to get the, However, one of the things of this mythology is the idea of the cowboy, right? That like, oh, the Wild West, blah blah blah. I mean, even things like the Pony Express, right? People have heard of that, right? They think, oh, the Pony Express must have lasted, long time. Must have, it was the only way to communicate. Blah. Blah. Do you know how long the Pony Express lasted? 18 months. Okay, that's how long your Wild West lasted. 18 months max. In my head, I say it NCC style, but I saw someone say Shay a long time ago. So it was like Shakespeare. Yeah, it's either or. So one of those things, and also I can't wait till I can finally get emotes too on YouTube. Like that's gonna be cool, because then I can put my like Shakespeare, my Palestinian flag, and other ones, and my Karomi ones. But like that, the Pony Express lasted 18 months. Okay. Why? Because then they built a railroad, and that looks so cool, Zed. Oh my gosh, I love that. Yes, I love the ace flag. So the emote you have. Cacao. Oh, the demi flag too. I thought Shakespeare called us Frank and Panty. Oh, imagine. I finished Six Flags yesterday. Oh, very nice, very nice. I see. I need to. I don't know. I need help with like either to learn how to do it or like something, because yes. Because I want a wiggler, okay? Because like you can see this my cozy, right? Like I want a wiggler that's kind of like, with the color scheme, because the color scheme is actually comes from this this blanket here that my mother actually crocheted for me, because it's in the same colors as the little emote right there. I was excited. If you want me to call you Frank and Frank and Panty, or like I told you yesterday, you just have to just have your pick of any of my emotes. Okay, thank you, Zed. And another thing too is like the cowboy, right? There can only be one, right? The Lone Ranger style cowboy myth, which was propagated a long time but is also much later to uplift the strong settler mythos. Well, I think the term cowboy comes from cowboy, the boy in the sense of servant, indentured servant, slave, and not as in male, child, young man. So the myth is, yeah, right. But the idea of a cowboy too, right, also was because it took Spanish/Mexican ranching, because the United States didn't have ranching at the time because there was no ranching areas, right, where you had it. So they instead appropriated those, right, stole those of the Mexican people that lived there, right, until the end of the Mexican-American War, or the conquest of northern Mexico, or whatever you like to call it, and they began to emulate. Right, they began to, right. This is why, for example, certain words that are associated with like cowboys, right, like buckaroo, right, is literally the Anglicization, right, the making into English of the Spanish word vaquero, right. So vaquero, buckaroo, right, because vaquero means cowboy. It literally has the word cow, vaca, right? Vaquero, right? Person pertaining to cow. So buckaroo comes from vaquero. It's the same, and rodeo, right? Like, in fact, the National Rodeo Finals actually said that the oldest form of like rodeo that exists, right, which is charreria, that comes from Jalisco, or what was then called the Kingdom of New Galicia, in what is now Mexico, is not considered rodeo. Right, like only the American ones, Yeah, yeah. I realized when I was living a short time in Argentina that these terms have, anglicized. Yeah. So but another thing too is like if you like, I don't know if people have ever watched or have ever read, right, Little House on the Prairie, but remember when Mr. Ingalls, Charles Ingalls, right, finds out that he can't actually that he can't actually settle where he wanted to settle. Right? Like why, what is the reason that he can't settle? Oh, Almanzo, yes, Almanzo, yes. Buckaroo makes me think of Bucko. Yeah, I mean Bucko does come from Buckaroo, but Bucko literally would just refer to the cow, because vaca, right? Buckaroo, vaquero, buck is the cow, right? So it's literally calling someone a cow, which is kind of weird, but I don't know. But regardless, Almanzo. But he gets mad. Why? Because they're like, well, this is gonna be, this land that you're on actually is gonna be given to the indigenous people, and he gets really, really mad about that. Remember? Like that's the thing that gets him super, super pissed off. Like, I hate the government because why can't they give me this land? It's like, yeah, because they were literally going to send all of the indigenous peoples from like the East Coast, through the Trail of Tears, multiple, iterations of it essentially, right, to settle, quote unquote, in Oklahoma, right? And that's what he's mad at, that they're, I barely remember the contents of those books. Yeah, I mean, like overall they're fine, right? Like there are some that are, and the show, which that does expand a lot on them, right? But yeah, I'm just
small subsistence farms in the quote-unquote untamed wilderness, and the Zionists had the kibbutzim. In 1910, the first kibbutz is founded in the north, called Degania, Hebrew for cornflower, on the lands of the Arab village Amjuni. It was established by a dozen young people, mostly male, who were on average about 17 years old when they arrived.
This is actually not that uncommon. In fact, there is another really good documentary too that's actually, I don't know, do people know who Louis Theroux is? He's like a documentarian presenter, right? Kind of. I mean, people perhaps if you're British would know him a bit more, but have a better chance. I'm not gonna say will have a better chance of knowing him. Oh, I love that pirate one. That's very nice. You know what's funny? It's from my entrance screen. I actually have the Transcend TTV, like the thing for what's the game called? Sea of Thieves. But I can't play it because I don't have a PC. So, but yeah, so Louis Theroux, he does one where he goes to these outposts, right, that are like I think he calls them ultra Zionists, and they're literally like teenage dudes out there that like instead of hanging up like pictures of like posters of like bands that they like or anime, they literally put up pictures of like rabbis and stuff. So but they're like very, very, very ideologically tied to like colonization, and they tend to be around the same age, like 17, whatever. Like they literally just go and live in, I mean, and those are the settlements that are actually considered illegal under Israeli law, although Israeli law is Israeli law, so I'll just put it like that.
In Palestine. The leader of the group, Yosef Basel, was 16 Tiganya embodied three components which would characterize the kibbutzim: community of consumption, community of work and production, and permanence of the community. The kibbutz is supposed to be an egalitarian agricultural community with gender equality and local common ownership. These collective settlements should form the nucleus of a socialist society.
So
Like, see, like the thing behind it, yes. Yeah, and then, yeah, once I finally get to, is it 500 or is it, I know 1,000 I can finally rate out on YouTube, but 500 I think I can put emotes, I think? I don't know. I don't want to, like, make it seem like, oh, I must get to this amount, but, you know, I'm just saying, like, I can't wait to be able to put, like, the Palestinian flag emote that we have on there, because, you know, I know a lot of people that want to, I mean, also the watermelon. I actually saw this really cool shirt someone was wearing at one of the protests, I think at Chapel Hill, at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, I think, or maybe I'm confusing it somewhere else. But like, it was so that the triangle, right, in the flag itself, right, is like a slice of watermelon, right? So it's like both, you know. Anyway, it looked cool.
yes, a kibbutz is a community based on the idea of socialism, where ownership of almost everything is shared. You see.
Hence, the kibbutz is frequently presented as a socialist paradise. Many left.
So here we go. The most successful manifestation, Stanislavski Zionism. Yeah, it's a very short introduction. This is by Oxford University Press, right? They're the ones that published the series very short introductions. The most successful manifestation of socialism remained the kibbutzim. That's not true. It wasn't socialism at all. Like, again, the fact that now a lot of them are places from 2017. Yeah, 2017. I don't know if, well, because the very short introduction, they're not that old, are they? Like, they're not like from the 90s. You know, it's, so yeah. So 2017, they have a very short introduction to Zionism. You know, if you want to, it's a very good starting point, right? So if you could find like a PDF of it, you know, you could always put it in the library, right? In the in the Discord, which, by the way, make sure to join the Discord. So then that way, you know, if people want to look at it, because again, it's you know, they are, as they are called, right, very short introductions, but they're very good launching off points if people want to do like research and stuff, which provide a large number of major political and military leaders. Like, yes, they did do these things, but the main reason why was because they were created so that way they were also, ethnically speaking, self-sustaining, right? No, I know. I'm just saying, if someone by chance happens to have a legally, you know, because, you know, in this chat, you know, we all honor our Lord and Savior Henry Kissinger, but, you know, anyway, but, you know, if people by any chance have institutional access and could leave it in the library for other people to read, I would really appreciate that. I'm actually going to start putting more stuff in there, because I mention a lot of books all the time, and sometimes I do have like our articles or something. I'll drop them in there, but yeah, like some books, like the one over here, right? Like I don't have a physical copy of it, and I can't find a good digital. It's very difficult for me to read digitally. I'll put it like that. Especially like for a whole book. Like if it's like an article, okay, that's one thing. But if it's like a whole book, it, you know. The Marxist-based kibbutzim still practice communal ownership of the means of production. See, this doesn't, like, the problem with this is that there were some that were agricultural, right? But they didn't last very long, right? They only were able to do so because of the subsidies by the state. But the communal ownership was not by everybody there. It was only for one ethnic group, right? It was only for Jewish people. So it required dispossession. So it's not Marxist based, right? This is literally taking, right, the idea of communal ownership and just doing it ethno-nationally, right? And even this too is not exactly true, right? And the raising of children, right? Same articles are usually fine unless they're very long books. Like, I mean, look, on my throne, up here, I have books that pertain to my research. Like those are the books that, I mean, I've shown like people, like even this book here, right? Which is, and this book isn't even that, like I take a lot of notes, I mean, I'm an academic after all, right? Like I, produce scholarship. So, I have a lot of, notes and stuff. And so like, I like to have the physical book. So anyway, besides that, oh, it's cool. But like, this is not true. As years passed, hello, pirate. Hello. Oh, Abigail Quinn. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome in, welcome in. How are you? How are you? It's so good to see you. That is such a cute little emote. Yeah, I really wanna Wiggler. Okay. But as the years passed, the absolute prohibition of private property was moderated. See, the problem with this, right, is how did they acquire the land to do the thing, right? They stole it from someone. That's why it's not Marxist. Like, Marx doesn't say go steal someone's land, right? Some oppressed people's land, and try to do your experiment there. No. Like, and the fact that the absolute prohibition of private property, there were so many people like that had businesses that were, anyway. There's a reason why there's a reason why billionaires can live in kibbutzim now, right? And say, oh, I lived in a socialist, blah blah blah, right? As more and more small scale property was permitted for members. I mean, yeah. Anyway, like it's like what this doesn't take into account though is the fact that yes. The absolute right, exactly. That's not true, right? The absolute prohibition of private property, that's not true, because if that were the case, right, then that means Palestinians could also be part of the group, right? Hello, Igloo, welcome in. It's so nice to see you. So it's like, oh, they made everybody, work at the kitchen, like you chop the onions, you chop the tomatoes, like that's not socialism, right? That's just, but yeah, but one other thing too is like when it would also mean that everything, even clothing, would be non-private, right? Exactly. I mean, it's just it like and in the kibbutzim affiliated with Mapai, which is the Workers' Party, it is the party of workers in the land of Israel. I mean, that's what Mapai stands for, but it's just like the Labor Party, or some people call it socialist, but it's not. Obviously, I mean, rather than Mapam, which was another party, children began more and more to be housed with their parents. Yeah, like the reason why most of this stuff was even shared in the first place was so then that way they wouldn't have to possibly depend upon Arab labor, right? Like they did the kibbutzim to do ethno-nationalism, not socialism, right? That's why stuff was done in common, right? Oh, only Jewish people can raise Jewish kids, right? Like that's what Stanislavski's kind of like ignoring right here. It's like, and also, and as you mentioned, the placement of the kibbutzim are very, yeah, exactly. I mean, they were placed in places like the Jezreel Valley, right? The area around, what is now the Gaza Strip, right? And on the road to Jerusalem. right? But the ones in the north are particularly important because they ended up doing clearings. Now, if you don't know what clearings are, it's ethnic cleansing, right? It's ethnic cleansing. That's what it is, right? Where they try to get as many small farmers that were Arabs, that were Palestinians, to run away, so that way they could claim that it was absentee property and then steal that land, right? That's why the kibbutzes that are there benefit very much so from the water that is stolen from the aquifer underneath the West Bank, right? That then gets pumped to their farmland instead of being used for Palestinian water. So,
and liberal authors still refer to them as solid examples of communism. Noam Chomsky has spoken fondly of them. These researchers describe it as one of the most downright...
Okay, the fact that Noam Chomsky. Look, I get why people want to say, oh, it's nice because it's a commune. The problem is that it's an ethno-nationalist commune, right? Like, yeah, sure, I suppose, not having to, whatever, right? Owning things in common, whatever, like living in a compound is fine. But that does not ameliorate the condition of all the people. So, I mean, on that, that would be my issue with that. The main tool of the Zionist structure, the kibbutz, was it's not. I mean, just...
successful socialist experiments in the world. The socialist Zionists, who had arrived mainly from the Russian Empire, came with various leftist currents which they sought to marry with Zionism: Marxism, anarchism, utopian socialism, libertarian socialism, Russian populism through peasant idealism, and so on. In the last part, we introduced Ber Borochov, who worked out the theoretical principles of labor Zionism and who became its main ideological leader. But he wasn't the first one to bridge the gap between socialism...
The funny thing is that Dov in Hebrew means bear. So his name is Ber Borochov. Anyway.
...and Zionism. This was done by another guy, which represented the utopian socialist current, Nachman Sirkin, who formulated his constructivist socialism utopia, believing that there was no capitalism to be destroyed in Palestine. Thus...
What? Okay. There was no capitalism. Bear the bear. Yeah, exactly. Bear the bear. Yeah, because like Dov is a very common name, but like, it's like Dov Berenstein. It's like, oh well, your name is Bear Berenstein. Like okay. One, I mean, yeah, was it semi-feudal? Sure, but it's funny because like with this sentiment, then that means that we could say like, oh, if you go to some, like that's like saying like the DRC, the most war-torn regions in the eastern part, and also in the Katanga region, right? That there's no capitalism there, right? It's like, no, capitalism is there. Imperialism is there. So that's just the L right there.
Last struggle would take a different, less violent form than in Europe. His optimism rested...
That's a weird... I don't know. That's just...
On a lie, of course. Namely,
oh yeah,
Palestinians, which were irrelevant according to him, would simply accept their social chauvinist northern masters, trying to displace them without big trouble.
Oh yeah, because that's what people always do. It's like, hey, my northern, so whatever, chauvinist masters. Oh yeah, like you own my house. Oh go, just. I don't know who thinks this. Like, I mean, I know why they thought this, because they're like, oh, we also have the British Empire behind us, so But
Palestine, he wrote, thinly populated, in which the Jews constitute today 10% of the population, must be evacuated for the Jews.
That's just oy oy. Oh, I like the little bongo cat. That would be that's another emote that I would like, but I still want my Wiggler.
As a leading figure in the World Coalition Conference, he was given the task of
clearing. Sounds a bit more like the IDF's term mowing the lawn. Well, the phrase clearings actually comes from England, Northern England. They had in the 17th century they had clearings, and that's what they would call them, right? But and also prior to that, but it's just another way of saying ethnic cleansing, right? But clearings, right? Like transfer, right? It's another one of those. Also, Neuro, right? I don't mean to like, but by any chance, what is your I mean, again, you don't have to say any specifics, but like, are you like a historian or something like that, or studying history?
Visiting Palestine to develop a plan for kibbutz settlement, but he died of a heart attack in New York City.
Oh my gosh. Oh yes. Oh, that's nice. That's very nice.
Before ever visiting Palestine.
Yeah, Nachman ben Eliezer Sirkin. Yeah. One thing I guess that I can go over right now is Jewish cemeteries function a little bit different than non-Jewish cemeteries, I guess, in that one, it is common for people to have this like plants put right there. That is common. I don't know why they would put oleander though. I'm not a fan, but to each their own, I guess. But one thing Jewish people do is we don't put flowers, right? Like usually when people visit a gravesite, they leave flowers, right? We leave stones, we leave rocks. So that's why you will often see, right? Because rocks are symbolize something that lasts forever, right? Something that lasts a very long time. And so that's how we recognize, right? That's how we commemorate those that have passed by leaving rocks there, right? And to be there as a sign of connection and permanence, right? That transcends, right? Something like flowers that are very ephemeral. So if you see a lot of rocks on a gravesite, a lot of times it's because they're Jewish. In fact, I actually remember once when I was back in Mexico with my mother, back in Mexico City, we went to this cemetery because sometimes there aren't Jewish cemeteries, right? They're just cemeteries, and they can do a Jewish service, I suppose. But what ended up happening was, oh, okay, the juice one. Oh, nice. Yes, please join us in following Igloo for sure. That there was someone who literally, it was like that they knew that they were Jewish, but that they didn't know anything else about that person. And that was a place that whenever I would pass by, because it was next to a park that I would go to, I would always leave a stone there, right? As a kind of like, the fact that we don't know. Oh, I was just asking because I'm not a historian or anything, just interested in politics since a kid, as well as the Palestinian plight. Yeah. And people since I was a kid as well. I tend to believe for most of my life undiagnosed. Later, diagnosed neurodivergence hindered my academic journey. Still, I like to read academic papers and study such on my free time. I mean, I definitely know. I mean, like, I'm neurodivergent as well, and like I know exactly what you mean. Like, it's very, like, academia is very difficult to navigate when, reasons, right? So.
His remains were buried in the kibbutz Kinneret beside other labor Zionist pioneers.
So Kinneret, right? Kinneret, that is what in Hebrew we call the Sea of Galilee, right? So this is where Jesus walked on water, right? This is where the loaves and the fish, right? Like where all that stuff happened. This is what they're talking about. It's really, it's called a sea, but it's really just a big lake. And before, the border between Israel, and Syria used to include this, because Syria is Golan Heights, right? But now that's not the case anymore. Now the border is, now Israel has occupied the Golan Heights, right? So.
Years. The settlement Kfar Sirkin was named after him, serving as a stronghold for the Haganah.
Kfar, right? Or Kefar, if you want to roll the R, but Kfar means village in Hebrew. So, like, when they're talking about, like, Kfar, whatever, right? Like, just so people know, right?
During the Arab Revolt in the late 30s. And now, an IDF...
And yes, I like my language facts. That's why, because I am multilingual, so I like to, sometimes bring in those.
Military base called Sirkin Base is located close to the village. Aside from the colonizer aspect...
Like, look, you could have something like this without ethno-nationalism, right? Without fascism, without, bigotry and hatred and expulsion and genocide. Language is interesting, cool. Yes, I agree. I agree very much so. If people want to live like this, but it should not come at the expense of the indigenous people. They should not be excluded. They should not be, harmed in any way, etc., etc. And it's just, it's sad that people think that, like, like, if you want to make an omelet, you have to crack a few eggs, quote unquote, right? It's like, no, you don't actually. I'm sure that there were many people who would have been glad to join, right? Who, what about their wants? What about their needs, right? Instead, no, they were forced into exile, into being refugees. The first Moshav Ovdim, Moshav Ovdim means workers cooperative, because Ovdim comes from the word avodah, right, which means work. So avodah, Ovdim means workers, right? Someone who does work is, someone who does avodah is an Ovdim, or Ovdot, so in Hebrew, Hebrew has masculine, feminine, everything. I'm not even joking. Like, it's hypergendered, right? In that it literally has two number systems, right? Like, if you're talking about, say, like, if you're talking about, two T's, right? You would say, Shtayim Teim, right? Two T's, right? As in, hot tea, right? But that's because it's masculine, right? It's gendered masculine, right? There are also feminine numbers, right? Which are similar but are different. And you cannot use feminine numbers to talk about masculine things, and nor the other way around. But two whole number sets that are like that, right? And also conjugation that also reflects that, which also means that the entire sentence has to be conjugated with that taken into account. So, it's I saw animations on my channel. Haven't watched. Oh, sorry.
Agricultural communes in general, no matter how egalitarian they might be, are of course not socialism.
Everything you see in our town.
Exactly. Like a commune, like this is not socialism in and of itself, because it requires oppression to exist. The whole point about socialism is we want to end the oppression. We want to end the suffering, not enable it and not do it, not be the perpetrators of it.
Greenhouses, livestock, all shared. Collective ownership.
So, communism.
Nah, it ain't like that.
It is that, literally. This is a commune. We're communists.
Marx and Engels had criticized the so-called...
Oh my gosh. Okay, sorry, that was just like, yeah, I mean, that's literally the way how they want to define it, but
Utopian socialists, not because they imagine
I
a better
know.
world, but for their wrong method to approach the problems of society. Utopian socialism meant, quote, the concoction by means of the imagination of an ideal society as perfect as possible, instead of relying on, quote, insight into the nature, the conditions, and the consequent general aims of the struggle waged by the proletariat. Marx explained, quote, the utopian founders of sects found neither in society itself the material conditions of its transformation, nor in the working class the organized power and the consciousness of the movement.
See, like, okay, this is a very interesting critique, right? Because what it's saying is that the issue with a lot of utopianist movements, right, is that they want to just kind of like cut themselves off from the world, right? I mean, this is why, you know, I don't even know, what would you like even call this, like eco-anarchism, right? Like a lot of it is just it has this like kind of strange understanding of like the working classes, and so instead it just wants to cut itself off from that and just, you know, have a return to nature, quote unquote, right? And of course I'm reducing this down to the most basic level, so, you know, obviously this is not a full, you know, insight into that, right? But instead of, right, focusing on the working classes and the imperialized peoples of the world, what is being sort of critiqued here is the fact that it later what I guess one way that what could interpret it as best Marx is trying to sort of use it for is that it can become there's a special group that gets to have this thing, right? Like, oh, well, we get to live in the commune, but not everybody else, right? Like we get to do, you know, and that's partially what he's trying to get at here.
Hence why most secular communes, in an attempt to demonstrate socialist superiority through small-scale working models on the margins or outside of existing society, quickly fail, as was attempted in the US, for instance, where French...
Right, like that is one of the things, right? Like you cannot just like, oh, well then, like, and this is interesting too, because a lot of right-wingers, right, will say, well then why don't you just go, you know, live in the middle of nowhere and start I mean, you can't, right? Because land, by definition in the United States, is owned by someone. Yeah, exactly. We exclusively get to do socialism, right? On the necks of the exactly, right? Like that's the problem, right? Like when you're doing that, then that's no longer socialism, right? Like that's just, oh, you know, it's essentially like, you know, kindergarten, but just, you know, forever, you know, just, you know, it's just adult kindergarten, right? Like sharing, you know, like sharing in and of itself is not communism. But, you know, I have a bit of a headache. I'm going to lie down a bit. I really enjoy the way you teach. Oh, thank you so much, Kant. I really appreciate that. That's so sweet. And so one of the things that they're critiquing here is that there are people that you know, do say, oh, well then I'm just going to go into the wilderness and just start my own thing, right? And the issue is like that doesn't necessarily emancipate, right, the working classes, right? Like not every, you know, it and that's exactly what the kibbutzim are, right? Exactly what Neuro Riot is saying, right? Like it comes at the expense of other people, but not only that, it's not even that thing itself, right? Like it's just, you know.
Utopian socialist Etienne Cabet founded utopian communities in Texas and Illinois. There's this good text likely written by Marx associate Karl Schapper arguing against those utopian communities. Communism can only be realized in society as a whole and is not, quote, an accidental discovery of this or that ingenious brain, in small isolated pockets in a sea of class society, outside of history and the struggle for state power. It's impossible just, quote, to impose this upon society from without by propaganda, and wherever it was possible by the example of model experiments. In the case of left Zionism, this was more dramatic than just failing at bringing about the social revolution through utopian fantasies. The kibbutzim leader...
It's co-opting a term, idea, concept that was becoming more and more popular with the general populace, in some way similar to how the National Socialists of the early 20th century Germany used it to gain power, then disregarded. Right. And again, this is where, right, the other people, right, that were part of that group, right, really are kind of instrumental, right, to also understanding, right, because people always focus on, Adolf, right, like, but there were other writers, other thinkers, right, that contributed to this, right, that were even, like, as I'm saying this, like, members of the government, right. One of them who coined a term, right, that is still used to this day by right-wingers, by fascists, excuse me, comes from the title of his book, right, where in essence what is being described, right, is what is being described, right, is essentially kind of like what they mentioned about the, like, peasant idealism, right, but different, right. The book is titled, it's by Wilhelm, right, is it Wilhelm Darre, Darre, D-A-R-R-E, Darre, and it's called The New Nobility of Blood and Soil, right, Blut und Boden, right, and now, that last bit is known for being, right, particularly, pernicious, but when, Walter Darre, when he's writing this, he essentially wants to do kind of like what the kibbutzim are doing, right? That, like, the alienation of, industrial society has been such that, the people, no longer feel any connection to blah, 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 right? It's that, right? The issue was that the war, like, once the war started, then the whole, like, let's start the, German communes, right? Never came into fruition. But that book in and of itself is trying to say that, like, yes, the people of the land, right, the people that have this connection, they are the true nobility, right, as opposed to the, like, the Habsburgs, right, that were, like, inbred and blah, 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 right, etc., etc., which is hilarious too, because I actually have a Habsburg emote, Habsburg chin emote. But anyway, so, like, with Walter Darre and that book, right, that also feeds into a lot of the same notions that are here, right, and also in other ethno-nationalist movements around the world, right, that, like, they say, well, that the idea of the peasantry, even when it doesn't exist anymore, right, like, this is why, remember, like, when Dutch farmers were, like, revolting, quote unquote, right, and people were like, oh, see, like, this is the real blah, blah, blah. That, a lot of that comes from this idealization of the rural, right, like the sort of idealization of rural life, right, as being simplistic, as more natural, as more etc., 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 right, as opposed to modernity, right, is part of the argument of Walter Darre's book, but is also part of a lot of arguments by fascists, right, that, like, oh, the issue is the way in which, capitalism exists, but if you put us in charge, then we will, return to this, time of, where everybody was essentially an aristocrat, I guess, which never existed, but, it's one of those things, like, and that's kind of what the kibbutzim are, right? It's like, oh, yes, you are special and you get to even live in a special commune, right? But it involves you having to not have another group of people that stewarded the land so that you could even be there in the first place, right? And so again, with Walter Darre's book, right, with that idea of Blut und Boden, right, you get this idea that not only there is a union to the land that is like physical, but also a metaphysical one, right? And that's where the racialist ideas of the late 19th century by Herbert Spencer, by, you know, other people, right? Like, not Hopke, what's his name? Well, just other racialist thinkers, you know, I mean, even Oswald Spengler, etc., right? In his second volume of The Decline of the West, etc., or even Evola, right? And others, right? Like I said, like maybe not directly genetic. Well, Evola does actually do one, but he calls it like on the myth of the blood. Anyway, I'm going too far in the weeds now. But the point being that then it becomes this idea that since we're all blood related, right? That's also another reason why we're the natural aristocracy, right? And you can see how that also, like, you can superimpose that on the kibbutzi movement, and it fits very well, right? Because yes, they're trying to connect to this land, but the people that get to be there are there because of this idea of some racial unity, right? And so by definition is exclusionary. And so that's where a lot of the like farming rhetoric, like, and you see this even in like the films of the time, you know, where everything is looking at the countryside, right? Oh, that it's the countryside where like the real Germany is. I mean, we have that in the United States, the heartland, right? Even though 90+% of people live in urban conurbations, people still act like the rural thing is like half the country. It's like less than 10%. So, and even then, most farms are industrial farms anyway. It's not like mom and pop farms, right? But it's more the idealization of this people that have connection, right? And using the aesthetics of like peasantry and farming, etc., to then dispossess, right? And it was this actually that connected with the idea of Lebensraum, right? Which was developed in Germany. First, actually, it's interesting because it wasn't initially applied in a sociological sense, right? At first, it was applied in a biological sense, so that like organisms require the space that they need, blah, 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 right? Then it got taken from that step, right? From when the first time that concept, you know, was used, Lebensraum, living space, right? And then was used to describe, you know, human beings, right? So then you have something like this, right? Where it's like, oh yes, you can have the communes that are of these people that are united by blood, right? Or by, you know, whatever, et cetera, right? Whatever mythology you want to add in. And also, you have this, you know, this idea that like, and because of this, therefore we need to have space in order to blah, 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 right? So again, I don't want to make one-to-one comparisons. I don't think that that's very useful, right? I get why some people do it. And again, if Palestinian people want to do so, I feel that that's perfectly all right if they want to make the comparison to a direct comparison to the Nazis. But like when Germans start to compare, you know, it gets a little bit, you know, of an issue for me. But regardless, speaking of which, I am actually rather hungry, so I think we are going to raid out over to Bakery Manzada's stream. Everyone, please get into the machine while we head over to go say hello to Cam. Bakery Manzada. Thank you, everyone, so much for being with me for this stream. I appreciate each and every one of you. I will see all of you very soon. Bye.